People keep asking me why I didn't say something sooner, why I didn't tell anyone about the guy who kept coming in during my closing shifts at Brewster's Coffee House. The truth is, I did tell someone. I told my manager, Diane, and she brushed it off like I was being paranoid. It's a coffee shop, sweetie. People come in for coffee. But this wasn't about coffee. Anyone who's worked late-night service in a small town knows the difference between a regular customer and someone who's watching you. My 23rd birthday had just passed in September, and I'd been pulling these Thursday and Saturday closing shifts for about 6 months. The money was decent for coastal Maine, and I needed it to save up for a place of my own. Living with 3 roommates in a drafty house off Route 1 wasn't exactly the dream, but it beat moving back in with my parents in Augusta. Brewster's sat on the corner of Harbor Street and Pine, one of those brick buildings that looked charming during tourist season, and absolutely desolate once October hit. By Halloween, most of the summer people had cleared out, and the town felt like it had shrunk to half its size. The first time he came in was mid-September, maybe 2 weeks after my birthday. It was a Thursday night around 9:45 p.m., 15 minutes before closing. We didn't get many people that late on weeknights, maybe 1 or 2 stragglers grabbing a coffee for the road. He walked in wearing a dark green jacket, the kind with too many pockets, and a baseball cap pulled low. Nothing unusual about that. Plenty of guys dressed like that around here, especially the ones who worked on the fishing boats or in construction. What struck me was how he didn't look at the menu board, didn't look at anything except me. He ordered a black coffee, paid in exact change, and sat at the corner table near the window. That table had a direct view of the counter where I worked. I went about my closing routine, wiping down the espresso machine, restocking the pastry case for morning, counting the register. The whole time I could feel him staring. Not glancing, staring. When I finally looked up, he'd turn his head just slightly like he'd been caught, but not enough to seem embarrassed. Just enough to let me know he knew I'd noticed. He stayed until 10:03 p.m. I'd already locked the front door at closing time, and he'd watched me do it. Then he stood up, walked to the door, waited for me to unlock it, and left without saying a word. Didn't even throw away his cup. The second time was that Saturday. Same routine. Came in at 9:47 p.m., ordered black coffee, exact change, corner table. Same stare. This time I tried making conversation, thinking maybe I was reading too much into it. "Cold out there tonight, huh?" He nodded. Didn't smile, didn't respond, just nodded and kept his eyes on me. I felt this knot forming in my chest, the kind you get when you're in a situation that isn't dangerous yet, but could become dangerous if you make the wrong move. I texted my roommate Jenna around 9:55 p.m. "Creepy guy here again." She wrote back, "Want me to come get you?" I almost said yes. But then I thought about how ridiculous it would sound if I had to explain it to Diane the next day. A guy came in for coffee and sat quietly. That's it. That's the whole story. So I texted back, "No, I'm good. Just venting." He left at 10:05 p.m. that night. I watched through the window as he walked down Harbor Street toward the marina, hands in his pockets, not in any hurry. The streetlights made his shadow stretch out long and thin behind him. It became a pattern. Every Thursday and Saturday for the next month, he'd show up between 9:45 and 9:50 p.m. Always the same order, always the same table, always staring. I started timing my closing tasks differently, staying behind the counter as much as possible, keeping the espresso machine between us like some kind of barrier. I memorized his features during those weeks, the way his eyebrows were darker than his hair, which was a sandy brown that looked greasy under the fluorescent lights. He had this small scar above his left eye, shaped like a fishhook. His hands were rough, calloused, with dirt permanently wedged under his fingernails. He never wore a wedding ring, never carried a phone that I could see. On October 10th, I finally told Diane about him. We were doing inventory in the back room and I tried to keep my voice casual. "There's this guy who keeps coming in right before close. It's kind of weird." She barely looked up from her clipboard. "Is he bothering you? Like saying anything inappropriate?" I hesitated. No, but he just sits there and watches me. Diane sighed in that way managers do when they think you're wasting their time. Honey, we're a public business. As long as he's not harassing you or breaking any rules, there's nothing I can do. Maybe he just likes the coffee. I didn't bring it up again. The Thursday before Halloween, something changed. He came in at his usual time, but instead of going straight to the corner table, he walked up to the counter and stood there. Just stood. I was refilling the sugar dispensers and nearly dropped one when I realized he was right in front of me. Can I help you? My voice came out shakier than I wanted. He tilted his head slightly, like he was considering the question. Then he said, "You work alone a lot." Not a question, a statement. My heart started hammering in my chest, but I forced myself to smile. That fake customer service smile I'd perfected over months of dealing with difficult people. Sometimes. Can I get you anything else tonight? He didn't answer right away. Just kept looking at me with these pale blue eyes that didn't blink nearly enough. Finally, he said, "Black coffee," even though he'd already ordered and paid. I told him he'd already gotten his coffee, pointed to the cup in his hand. He looked down at it like he'd forgotten it was there, then walked to his usual table without another word. I immediately pulled out my phone and started typing a text to Jenna. He just said something really creepy, but I deleted it. What would I even say after that? He made an observation, he noted that I work alone. Diane was right, he hadn't technically done anything wrong. That Saturday, October 26th, he didn't show up. For the first time in over a month, I closed the shop without him sitting in that corner, watching. I should have been relieved. Instead, I kept glancing at the door, expecting him to walk in any second. The anxiety of anticipating him was somehow worse than having him actually there. I texted Jenna, "Creepy coffee guy didn't come in tonight." She responded with a party emoji, and maybe he finally got the hint. But I couldn't shake this feeling in my gut that his absence meant something. When I locked up at 10:15 p.m. and walked to my car in the back lot, I found myself practically running. Every shadow looked like it could be him. Every sound made me whip my head around. I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes before starting the engine, checking the back seat 3 times, making sure all the doors were locked. The drive home felt longer than usual. I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced I'd see that green jacket somewhere behind me. When I finally got to the house, Jenna was still up, watching some reality show in the living room. "You okay?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed it off, told her I was just tired. But that night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the way he'd said, "You work alone a lot," and wondering what he'd meant by it. Halloween fell on a Thursday that year. I'd been dreading it all week. Thursday meant closing shift, and some part of me knew he'd be back. Diane had asked if I wanted to switch shifts with someone since it was Halloween, but I said no. I don't even know why. Maybe I didn't want to seem scared. Maybe I thought if I acted normal, everything would be normal. The shop was busier than usual during the day. Parents bringing kids in for hot chocolate. Teenagers grabbing pumpkin spice lattes before heading out to parties. By 8 p.m. though, it had cleared out completely. The string of orange lights Diane had hung in the window looked more eerie than festive once the sun went down. I spent the next hour and a half in this state of heightened awareness, every time the door chimed making me jump. At 9:30 p.m. I started my closing routine early. Wiped down the tables, emptied the trash, began breaking down the espresso machine. At 9:47 p.m. the door chimed. I looked up, and there he was. Same green jacket, same baseball cap. But this time, he was smiling. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The kind that makes you realize the person wearing it knows something you don't. He ordered his black coffee, paid in exact change, walked to the corner table. I tried to focus on closing tasks, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling as I counted the register. I miscounted twice, had to start over. At 9:55 p.m. my phone buzzed. Text from Jenna. "Happy Halloween, we're ordering pizza, want us to save you some?" I started typing back, "Yes, please." But then I looked up and he was staring directly at me. not just looking, staring with this intensity that made my thumb hover uselessly over the screen. I set the phone down on the counter and went to the back room, pretending I needed to grab something. I stayed there for maybe 2 minutes, trying to calm down, telling myself I was overreacting. When I came back out, he was standing at the counter, not sitting at his table, standing right there, inches from where I'd left my phone. "We're closed," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. He glanced at the clock on the wall. "It's only 9:57. He was right. I'd locked the door at 10 p.m. every other night he'd been there. "I'm closing early tonight," I lied. "Halloween and all." He nodded slowly, but he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he said, "You dropped something." He pointed to the floor behind the counter. My phone. It was on the floor, screen side down. I know I'd left it on the counter. I bent down to pick it up, and that's when I saw his shoes, work boots, scuffed and stained, positioned right at the edge of the counter on the employee side. He'd come behind the counter. While I was in the back room, he'd walked around and stood where only staff were supposed to be. The realization hit me like ice water. I straightened up fast, phone clutched in my hand, and took several steps back toward the espresso machine. "You need to leave," I said, and this time my voice definitely shook. "Now." He held up both hands in this mock surrender gesture, that same disturbing smile still on his face. "Just trying to help." He walked back around the counter, slowly, deliberately, maintaining eye contact the entire time. When he reached the door, he stopped and turned back. "Same time next week?" My throat had gone completely dry. I managed to nod even though every instinct was screaming at me to say no, to tell him never to come back. But I was terrified of what he might do if I antagonized him. He left, and I immediately locked the door behind him, flipping the deadbolt with shaking fingers. I watched through the window as he walked toward the parking lot, but instead of leaving, he just stood there under the streetlight, facing the shop, watching me watch him. I grabbed my phone and opened my messages. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely type. I started writing to Jenna, "He's here again." But then I stopped. "He's here again." Those 3 words looked wrong on the screen, inadequate for what I was feeling. I deleted them and tried again. "That guy from the coffee shop came behind the counter tonight. He moved my phone. I think he..." But I didn't know how to finish that sentence. "I think he what? I think he's dangerous? I think he's planning something?" I had no proof, just this overwhelming sense of dread that had been building for weeks. I stood there with my phone in my hand, cursor blinking, trying to find the right words. Through the window, I could still see him standing in the parking lot. He hadn't moved, wasn't even pretending to walk to a car. Just standing there, hands in his pockets, staring at the shop. At me. I made a decision. I deleted what I'd written and typed something new. "He's here again." Short, simple. Something Jenna would understand meant I needed help. But before I could hit send, the lights went out. Not just in the shop, the street lights too. The whole block had gone dark. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged in the sudden silence. The only light came from my phone screen, casting this pale glow on my face. And in that glow, I could see through the window that he was gone. The spot where he'd been standing was empty. My first instinct was to call 911, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. They hovered over the numbers while my brain raced through possibilities. Power outage, completely normal for coastal Maine in late October. Wind knocks down a transformer, whole neighborhoods go dark. Happens all the time. But the timing felt too perfect, too deliberate. I turned on my phone's flashlight and swept it across the shop. Everything looked normal. Empty tables. Clean counters. The Halloween decorations casting strange shadows on the walls. Then I heard it. A soft knock on the back door. 3 taps, evenly spaced. My whole body went rigid. The back door led to the alley where we took out trash, where delivery trucks dropped off supplies. There was no reason for anyone to be back there at 10 p.m. on Halloween night. No reason except one. The knock came again. 3 taps. Patient. Like whoever was out there had all the time in the world and knew I was listening. I should have called the police right then, should have hit those 3 numbers and waited for help. But instead, I found myself walking toward the back of the shop, phone flashlight leading the way. I don't know why I did it. Maybe some part of me needed to confirm what I already knew. Maybe I thought if I could just see him, identify him properly, I'd have something concrete to report. I reached the back door and stood there, hand on the deadbolt. The metal felt cold under my palm. I could hear breathing on the other side, slow, steady breaths that matched the rhythm of those knocks. Then a voice, muffled through the door, but unmistakable. "I know you're there." It was him. Had to be. But the voice sounded different than it had inside the shop. Less controlled. More excited. "Open the door," he said. "We need to talk." Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get out the front and sprint to my car. But my car was in the back lot. To get to it, I'd have to go outside eventually, and he'd be waiting. The front door led to Harbor Street, which would be mostly empty this time of night. I'd be running in the dark with no idea where he was or if he had a car. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me jump. Text from Jenna. "You on your way home?" The screen light illuminated my face, and I realized with growing horror that it probably illuminated the gap under the door too. He could see the light. He knew exactly where I was standing. "I just want to talk," he said again. And this time I heard something else in his voice. Impatience. The doorknob started to turn. Slowly at first. Testing. The deadbolt held, but watching that knob rotate made something inside me snap into action. I backed away from the door, typing as fast as I could. "He's here again, back door, call police now." I hit send and immediately dialed 911. My hands were finally working again, adrenaline overriding the fear. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and I whispered everything. The man, the weeks of watching, the power outage, the back door. She told me to stay on the line, that officers were 3 minutes away. 3 minutes felt like a lifetime. The doorknob had stopped turning, but I could still hear him out there moving around. Footsteps in the gravel. Then silence. The worst kind of silence, where you don't know if the danger has passed or if it's just repositioning. I moved to the front of the shop, keeping my back to the wall, phone pressed to my ear. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking me questions to keep me calm, but I barely heard her. I was focused on every sound, every shadow. Then I saw flashlight beams cutting through the darkness outside. Not from the street, but from the alley. Multiple beams moving fast. Voices shouting, "Police!" The relief that flooded through me was so intense I actually slid down the wall and sat on the floor. The dispatcher told me the officers were securing the perimeter, that I should stay inside until they cleared the area. Took another 5 minutes before someone knocked on the front door, proper knocking this time, with a voice calling out, "Police, ma'am, you're safe to open the door." They didn't find him. The officers searched the alley, the parking lot, the entire block. They found his coffee cup from earlier that night in the trash can outside, and they found something else. Fresh pry marks on the back door frame, like he'd been testing how easy it would be to force it open. They also found my phone had somehow sent that message to Jenna, even though I'd never hit send on the unsent draft. The officer said sometimes phones glitch under stress, messages get sent accidentally. But I remember deleting what I'd written and starting over. I remember the cursor blinking on "He's here again" without anything after it. The police filed a report, took my statement, checked the security camera footage. The camera showed everything I'd described. Him coming in, standing at the counter. Me going to the back room, him walking behind the counter. But when the power went out, the camera went out too. They saw him leave through the front door, saw him standing in the parking lot, and then nothing. Just static and darkness for the next 11 minutes until the power came back on. No footage of him at the back door. No evidence he'd even gone around the building. They told me I did the right thing by calling. They patrolled the area extra that night and the next few nights after. Diane finally agreed to schedule 2 people for closing shifts. I quit 3 weeks later anyway. I still don't know who he was. The police never identified him from the footage. Never got any hits when they ran his description through their system. Sometimes I wonder if he was ever really planning to hurt me, or if he just liked the fear. if he got off on watching someone slowly unravel. I moved back to Augusta after that. Got a job at a bookstore that closes at 6 p.m. I don't work nights anymore. I don't work alone. And I never ever ignore my gut when someone makes me uncomfortable. Because the scariest thing wasn't what he did. It was realizing how close I came to unlocking that door. Nobody believes me when I tell them I don't remember most of that night. The cops didn't believe me, my parents didn't believe me, and the psychiatrist they made me see definitely didn't believe me. But here's the thing. I've got the photos to prove at least part of what happened, and my car was found exactly where I left it, so something went down in those woods outside Spokane. October 2022 was supposed to be my breakthrough month as a photographer. I'd finally worked up the guts to quit my job at a tech support call center in August, right after my 27th birthday, and my parents had given me some money from selling their house to keep me afloat while I built a portfolio. Every day I wasn't scrambling for freelance work. I was out shooting, forests, abandoned buildings, whatever looked interesting. That Friday afternoon, I found a forum post about Riverside Forest Preserve, this spot about 40 minutes northeast of the city that supposedly had killer autumn colors and almost zero foot traffic. The photos people posted looked unreal. These golden aspens mixed in with dark pines, and the trails cut through terrain that would photograph like something out of a fantasy movie. I loaded up my Subaru around 3:30, throwing my camera bag and tripod in the passenger seat, along with a backpack that had water, an extra lens, and some granola bars I never ended up eating. The preserve wasn't some hardcore wilderness area. It was technically managed by the Forest Service with marked trails and everything, but it was far enough out that casual hikers didn't bother with it. I pulled into the gravel parking lot at 4:15, and the place was completely empty. Just my car and this weathered wooden sign showing a map of the trail system under scratched up plexiglass. 3 different loops, ranging from 2 to 6 miles, all cutting through dense woods with a few ridgeline sections that looked perfect for what I wanted. The sun was already dropping toward the horizon, painting everything in that thick golden light that makes every photo look expensive, and I figured I had maybe 2 hours before it got too dark to shoot. I grabbed my gear, locked the car, pocketed my keys, and headed down the main trail into the trees. The temperature was dropping fast, probably mid-40s, and the woods had that particular smell of cold air mixing with decomposing leaves and pine sap. Everything was quiet except for my boots crunching on the path. The trail started out wide and well-maintained, packed dirt with the occasional route crossing it, but after maybe 10 minutes of walking it narrowed down to barely more than a deer path. I passed a few spots where smaller trails branched off into thicker woods, but I kept following the main route because the map had shown it led to a ridge with good sight lines. My camera was already out of the bag, hanging around my neck, because I kept seeing compositions I wanted to grab, the way the light filtered through the pine branches, clusters of bright orange mushrooms growing on a rotting log, that kind of thing. I wasn't in any rush. The whole point was to find 1 or 2 really solid spots and set up my tripod for some long exposure shots once the light got softer. About half a mile in, I found what I was looking for. The trail opened up where the ridge started, giving me this elevated view over a section of forest that dropped down into a small valley. The aspens were mixed in with the evergreens down there, creating these patches of yellow that looked incredible against the dark green. I could already visualize how the shots would look, maybe underexpose a bit to make the colors pop, shoot in RAW so I could really work the highlights in post. Perfect. I spent probably 15 minutes just walking around that ridge area, checking different angles and waiting for the light to hit just right. The sun was getting lower, maybe 45 minutes from setting completely, and the shadows were starting to stretch out long and dramatic across the forest floor below me. That's when I set up my tripod about 10 feet back from the edge of the ridge, right where the trail curved along the tree line. I mounted my camera, framed up a shot looking down the trail as it disappeared into the valley, and started making adjustments. The whole process was automatic by that point. Check the level, adjust the legs on uneven ground, dial in my settings. I took a few test shots, chimping the screen to check exposure, and everything looked good. But here's the weird part, and I didn't even notice it at the time. When I reviewed those photos later, really zoomed in and examined them, you could see something in the background. Way down the trail, maybe 100 yards into the trees, there was this shape that didn't quite match the surroundings. Not obvious. I wouldn't have caught it if I wasn't specifically looking, but it was there, like someone standing very still behind a cluster of thin tree trunks, just barely visible. At the time, though, I didn't see anything. I was focused on my composition, on getting the settings right, on capturing that specific quality of light before it disappeared. I kept shooting for another 20 minutes, moving the tripod around to different positions, trying various focal lengths. The woods were absolutely silent except for the occasional bird call, echoing from somewhere deeper in the preserve. No wind, no rustling, nothing. That kind of silence where you become hyper-aware of your own breathing, and every small sound you make seems too loud. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have the whole place to myself, how these shots were going to look amazing in my portfolio. Around 5:15, the light was starting to fade into that blue hour transition, and I decided to pack it in. I'd gotten what I came for, probably 40 or 50 shots that I knew included at least a few keepers. I collapsed my tripod, packed my camera back into the bag, and took one last look at the valley below. That's when I heard it. Not a loud sound, just this faint cracking noise, like someone stepping on a branch. It came from down the trail, the direction I'd been photographing toward. I turned and stared into the trees, waiting to see a deer or maybe another hiker, but nothing appeared. The forest had gone completely still again, that thick silence pressing in from all sides. I stood there for probably 30 seconds just listening and watching the trail ahead. The light was dim enough now that the shadows between the trees had turned into solid patches of darkness, making it hard to see more than 50 feet down the path. I called out, "Hello?" Felt stupid doing it, but I wanted to know if someone was there. No response. Just my voice getting swallowed up by the trees and then nothing. I told myself it was an animal, something moving through the underbrush off the trail, because what else would it be? But I'd been in plenty of forests before, and I knew what deer sounded like moving through woods. They make multiple sounds, leaves rustling, several branches breaking as they push through, hoofbeats if they're running. This had been one single crack, deliberate and sharp, like someone taking a step and putting their full weight on a stick. Shook it off and started walking back the way I'd come, following the trail toward the parking lot. My camera bag felt heavier now, the straps digging into my shoulders, and I was suddenly very aware of how quickly the temperature had dropped. My breath was visible in the air, these little clouds puffing out in front of me with each exhale. I walked faster than I normally would, not quite jogging but definitely moving with purpose, telling myself I just wanted to get back before it got completely dark. The trail that had seemed peaceful and beautiful an hour ago now felt different, claustrophobic, even though it was the exact same path. The trees seemed closer somehow, the shadows deeper. About halfway back to the parking lot, I heard it again. Another crack, same sound, but this time it was closer and definitely behind me. I stopped walking immediately, spinning around to look back down the trail. Nothing. Just the darkening path disappearing into the trees, the last bits of twilight filtering through the canopy. My heart was hammering now, that primitive part of your brain screaming that something's wrong even when you can't see any actual threat. I waited, straining to hear any follow-up sound, any movement. Silence. Complete and total silence. Not even birds anymore. I started walking again, faster now, my boots hitting the trail hard enough that I was making plenty of noise myself. I didn't care about being quiet. Part of me wanted to make noise, wanted to announce my presence, like that would somehow make whatever was out there leave me alone. The rational part of my brain kept trying to calm me down. You're alone in the woods at dusk. You're psyching yourself out. There's nothing here. But that rational voice was getting quieter with every step. Another sound, and this time I knew I wasn't imagining it. Footsteps. Not animal sounds, not branches randomly falling. Actual footsteps moving through the forest parallel to the trail. I could hear them clearly now, matching my pace, staying maybe 20 or 30 yards to my right in the thicker woods where I couldn't see through the trees. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped. I started again, slower this time, listening hard. The footsteps resumed, maintaining that same distance. My throat felt tight and my mouth had gone completely dry. Someone was out there pacing me, staying just out of sight in the darkening woods. I thought about calling out again, asking who was there, but something stopped me. Some instinct that said making noise, drawing attention to myself, was the wrong move. Instead, I kept walking, faster and faster, until I was basically jogging down the trail. The footsteps kept pace. Not running, not rushing, just matching my speed exactly. Like whoever it was didn't need to hurry because they knew where I was going. The parking lot was the only way out, and they knew I had to go there. I could see the trailhead up ahead now, maybe 100 yards away, the opening in the trees where it met the gravel lot. My car would be right there. Safety. I broke into an actual run, my camera bag bouncing against my back, my tripod banging against my hip where I'd strapped it to my pack. The footsteps in the woods sped up too, crashing through brush now, not bothering to be subtle anymore. They were running parallel to me, keeping pace, and I realized with absolute certainty that whoever it was could see me, but I couldn't see them. The trail curved slightly, and then I burst out into the parking lot, gasping for air, my lungs burning from the cold and the exertion. My Subaru was exactly where I'd left it, sitting alone in the gravel lot that was now almost completely dark. I fumbled for my keys in my pocket, my fingers numb and clumsy. And that's when I realized the footsteps had stopped. The woods behind me were silent again. I didn't turn around to look. I didn't want to see if someone was standing at the tree line watching me. I just got my keys out, hit the unlock button, and heard the beep and saw the lights flash. I yanked open the driver's door and practically threw myself inside, immediately hitting the lock button. The sound of all 4 doors locking simultaneously was the most comforting thing I'd ever heard. I sat there in the driver's seat, breathing hard, staring at the steering wheel while my hands shook from adrenaline. The dome light was still on, giving me a little bubble of visibility inside the car, and I could see my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was pale and sweaty despite the cold. I needed to start the car and get out of there, but for some reason I couldn't make myself put the key in the ignition yet. I was trying to process what had just happened, trying to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just another hiker who happened to be walking the same direction as me. But I knew that wasn't true. Nobody hikes off trail in the dark, and nobody matches someone else's pace that perfectly by accident. That's when I saw the movement in my passenger side mirror. Just a flicker, something shifting position near the tree line about 40 feet behind my car. My entire body went rigid. I stared at the mirror, not daring to turn around and look directly, and then I saw it again. Definitely a person, standing just inside the shadow of the trees. They were tall, wearing dark clothes that blended with the forest, and they were completely still, facing my car. I couldn't make out any features in the darkness, couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, couldn't see their face. They were just standing there, watching. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I jammed the key into the ignition with shaking hands and turned it. The engine started immediately, thank God, and I threw the car into reverse without even checking behind me, just desperate to move, to get away from that figure. I backed up maybe 10 feet before slamming on the brakes and shifting into drive, and in that brief moment when my reverse lights lit up the area behind me, I saw them clearly. They'd moved. They were closer now, maybe 20 feet from where my car had been parked, standing in the middle of the gravel lot. Still not moving, still just watching. The reverse lights went off as I shifted gears, and the figure disappeared back into darkness. I floored the accelerator, spitting gravel everywhere as my tires spun and caught, and I tore out of that parking lot like something was chasing me, which I guess something was. I don't remember the drive home. I know that sounds insane, but I have zero memory of the 40-minute trip back to my apartment. The next thing I clearly remember is sitting in my living room with all the lights on, still wearing my jacket, my camera bag on the floor next to me. My phone said it was almost 8 o'clock, which meant I'd lost about an hour and a half somewhere. I chalked it up to shock, to my brain just being on autopilot while I drove. But it bothered me. Still bothers me. I sat there for a long time, maybe another hour, just trying to calm down and make sense of what happened. Eventually, I convinced myself to pull out my camera and look at the photos I'd taken. Maybe there was something in them, some explanation, some detail I'd missed. I uploaded the SD card to my laptop and started going through the images one by one. The early shots looked exactly how I remembered. Beautiful golden light, the aspens, the valley, everything perfectly normal. But then I got to the later photos, the ones I'd taken from the ridge right before I started packing up. I zoomed in on one of them, just examining the composition, and that's when I saw it. Way down the trail in the background, barely visible between the trees, there was a person standing there. Not walking, not moving, just standing motionless, facing the camera, facing me. I went through every single photo from that location, and they were in 4 of them, always in the same spot, always perfectly still. In 2 of the images you could barely make them out, just a dark vertical shape that could have been a tree trunk if you weren't looking carefully. But in the other 2, where the angle and lighting were slightly different, you could see it was definitely a human figure. They were too far away to make out any details. No face, no clothing specifics, nothing that would help identify them. Just a person-shaped shadow standing deep in the woods, watching me work. I felt sick looking at those photos. This person had been there the whole time I was shooting, just standing motionless in the trees, and I never saw them. Never had any idea they were there until I heard that first branch crack. How long had they been watching before that? Had they followed me from the parking lot? Were they already in the woods when I arrived? The police asked me all these questions later, and I didn't have answers to any of them. What I did next was probably stupid, but I was terrified and not thinking clearly. I grabbed my phone and called 911. Told them everything. The footsteps, the figure in the parking lot, the person in my photos. The dispatcher kept me on the line and said they'd send someone to check out the preserve. 2 officers showed up at my apartment about 45 minutes later to take my statement and look at the photos. They were professional about it, wrote everything down, but I could tell they thought I was overreacting. One of them even suggested maybe it was just another photographer who happened to be shooting in the same area. The next morning I got a call from the sheriff's department that made everything so much worse. They'd sent officers to check the preserve at first light, and they found my car in the parking lot. My car. The same Subaru I'd driven home and parked outside my apartment building. The one I was staring at through my window while talking to the detective on the phone. Except it wasn't the same car, obviously. Mine was here, but there was a blue 2004 Subaru Outback with my exact license plate sitting in that gravel lot with the driver's door wide open, keys in the ignition, and my tripod still set up at the trailhead facing the woods. They ran the plates multiple times. They matched. They checked the VIN through the windshield. It matched. The detective asked me very carefully if I was absolutely certain I'd driven home last night, if there was any possibility I'd left my car there and gotten a ride with someone. I told him to look outside my building. My car was right there. He went quiet for a long time, then said they'd send someone to verify. 2 different officers came to my apartment within an hour, examined my car, photographed it, checked the VIN. Same car. Same exact car that was simultaneously sitting in the Forest Preserve parking lot 40 minutes away. They eventually figured out what happened, though the explanation didn't make me feel any better. Someone had cloned my license plates, probably saw my car parked somewhere around Spokane, noted the make and model, and made duplicates of my plates to put on their own vehicle. Same year, same color Subaru. It's apparently more common than you'd think, usually for toll evasion or parking ticket avoidance. But this person had driven their cloned car to the preserve after I left, parked it in the exact same spot, and staged it to look like I'd never made it out of those woods. Door open, keys in the ignition, tripod set up. Like I'd vanished mid-shoot. The police theory was that whoever followed me in the forest had intended to do something. rob me, attack me, worse. But I'd gotten away. So they went to plan B, making it look like something terrible had happened to me in those woods, maybe hoping to throw off an investigation or just fuck with me psychologically. They never found who did it. No prints on the abandoned car, no security cameras in the area, nothing. The vehicle had been reported stolen from a lot in Spokane 3 days before, and it was eventually returned to its owner. The whole case just died, but I know what I saw. I know someone stalked me through those woods, someone who had already gone through the effort of cloning my plates and planning something elaborate and disturbing. I haven't been back to any forest preserve since then. Can't bring myself to shoot anywhere isolated. And sometimes when I'm going through old photos on my hard drive, I'll see those images from that day and zoom in on that figure standing in the trees, and I'll wonder if they're still out there, watching someone else, waiting in the woods with a camera and a stolen car and God knows what else. That's what keeps me up at night. Not what happened, but what was supposed to happen if I hadn't run fast enough. October in Kentucky gets dark early, and that particular evening in 2016 was no exception. I'd been babysitting for the Andersons for about 6 months by then. They lived 40 minutes outside Lexington on this old tobacco farm that had been converted into a regular house sometime in the 80s. The property sat on 12 acres of mostly empty fields, with the nearest neighbor being a good half-mile down the gravel road. I remember driving out there that night, watching the sun disappear behind the tree line while my beat-up Corolla struggled with the unpaved driveway. The Andersons had 2 kids, Chloe, who'd just turned 7, and her little brother Noah, who was 4. Sweet kids, never gave me any trouble, always went to bed when they were supposed to. Their parents were attending some medical conference in Louisville. Dr. Anderson was a pediatrician, and his wife Nancy worked as a nurse at the same hospital. The house itself was one of those sprawling ranch-style places with windows everywhere. Floor to ceiling in the living room, big bay windows in the kitchen, regular windows in every bedroom. Nancy Anderson loved natural light, she'd told me once. Couldn't stand feeling boxed in. That night, though, with darkness pressing against all that glass, I wished there were fewer ways to see outside. Or more accurately, fewer ways for someone outside to see in. The kids and I had dinner around 6:30. Mac and cheese with hot dogs cut up in it because that's what Noah always requested. We played some board games afterward, Candyland mostly, and I got them into their pajamas by 8. While they brushed their teeth, I noticed the motion sensor light by the garage kept turning on. Probably deer, I figured. The Andersons had mentioned deer came through the property all the time, eating from Nancy's vegetable garden. But the light would click on, stay bright for its programmed 30 seconds, go dark for maybe a minute, then flash on again. Like something was walking back and forth out there, just beyond where I could see. Around 8:30, after both kids were tucked in their beds, I settled into the living room couch with my sociology textbook. I was finishing my degree at Eastern Kentucky University, just had 1 semester left. The house was quiet except for the dishwasher humming in the kitchen and the occasional creak that old houses make. I'd been reading for maybe 20 minutes when I heard it. 3 distinct knocks on the dining room window. Not frantic or aggressive, just 3 measured taps like someone politely trying to get your attention. I looked up from my book, staring at the dark glass, but couldn't see anything beyond my own reflection in the lamplight. The motion light by the garage wasn't on anymore. I waited, listening, telling myself it was probably a tree branch. The Andersons had this big oak that grew close to that side of the house. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. I went back to my reading, though I kept losing my place in the same paragraph about social stratification. Then came 3 knocks on the kitchen window. Same rhythm, same pressure, like knuckles against glass. The kitchen was on the opposite side of the house from the dining room. No trees on that side, just open field stretching toward the woods. I got up slowly, leaving my textbook on the couch, and walked to the kitchen doorway. The overhead light was off. I'd only left the small light above the stove on. Through the window above the sink, blackness, just my ghostly reflection staring back. The knocking came again, this time on the living room window, the huge floor-to-ceiling one. 3 taps. Deliberate, patient. Whatever was doing this was circling the house. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, thumb hovering over the emergency call button. But what would I say? Someone's knocking on windows? They'd think I was paranoid. The Andersons lived so far out that kids playing pranks seemed unlikely. But the alternative made my chest tight with a fear I didn't want to name. I decided to check on the kids first. Climbing the stairs as quietly as possible, I peeked into Noah's room, then Chloe's. Both were sound asleep. Noah sprawled out like a starfish with his dinosaur stuffed animal. Chloe curled up under her purple comforter. Their peaceful breathing should have calmed me, but instead it made me feel more responsible, more alone. As I stood in the hallway between their rooms, the knocking started again. This time on the window at the end of the hall, right behind me. 3 taps. Then immediately after, 3 taps on Noah's bedroom window, then Chloe's. Whoever was outside knew exactly where we all were, knew the layout of the house. My mouth went dry. I hurried back downstairs, grabbing the house phone from the kitchen counter. The Andersons had a landline because cell service was spotty out here. As I picked up the receiver, I saw something that made me stop breathing for a second. There was condensation on the outside of the kitchen window, like someone had been standing there, breathing against the glass. The knocking suddenly became rapid, urgent, moving from window to window so fast it seemed impossible for one person. Kitchen, living room, dining room, back door, garage door window, all around the house in a frantic circle. Not 3 polite taps anymore, but demanding pounds that rattled the frames. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I told the dispatcher someone was trying to break in. She kept me on the line, said deputies were on their way, told me to lock myself and the kids in a bathroom. But before I could move, everything stopped. Complete silence. No knocking, no footsteps outside. Even the dishwasher had finished its cycle. The dispatcher was still talking, but I barely heard her. Something about the sudden quiet felt worse than all that knocking. Through the kitchen window, I could see the motion light by the garage click on again. This time, illuminated in its harsh white glow, I saw someone standing at the very edge of its range. They weren't moving, just standing there facing the house, too far away to make out features, but close enough that I could tell they were tall, wearing something dark, maybe a coat or a long jacket. The figure raised one arm and waved at me. Slow, deliberate, like we were old friends meeting across a parking lot. Then they turned and walked backward into the darkness, keeping their face toward the house the entire time until the black swallowed them completely. The motion light clicked off. I told the dispatcher what I'd seen, and she said to get the children and lock ourselves in the bathroom now. But as I turned toward the stairs, I heard the front door handle jiggling. Not aggressive, just testing, seeing if it was locked. I'd checked it twice already. The handle stopped moving. Then I heard the same sound at the back door in the kitchen. Testing. The side door by the garage. Testing. Every exterior door, one after another, like they were making sure I'd secured everything. My legs felt weak as I forced myself up the stairs. I grabbed Noah first, his small body heavy with sleep, then rushed to Chloe's room. She stirred when I picked her up, mumbling something about a bad dream. If only she knew. I carried them both into the master bathroom, locked the door, and set them down in the bathtub with some towels as cushions. Chloe woke up more fully then, confused and scared by my behavior. I told her we were playing a game, like hide and seek, but we had to be very quiet. Noah stayed asleep, curled against his sister. The dispatcher was still on the line, telling me the deputies were 8 minutes out. 8 minutes feels like hours when you're hiding in a bathroom with 2 kids, straining to hear any sound from downstairs. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of glass sliding. The Andersons had this old sliding window in the laundry room that didn't lock properly. Nancy had mentioned getting it fixed, but hadn't gotten around to it yet. The window was small, but an adult could squeeze through if they really wanted to. I heard something hit the laundry room floor. A soft thud, like feet landing. Footsteps, slow and careful, moving through the house. Not rushing, not searching frantically, just walking like they had all the time in the world. They stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I held my breath, pulling Chloe closer, my hand over her mouth gently to keep her from speaking. The first stair creaked, then the second. Whoever was in the house was coming upstairs. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and paused. Through the gap under the bathroom door, I could see a shadow blocking the hallway light. They were standing right outside, not moving, not trying the handle, just standing there, breathing. I could actually hear them breathing, deep, steady breaths like they were trying to calm themselves down or maybe savoring the moment. The dispatcher was whispering that deputies were 3 minutes away, but her voice sounded tinny and distant through the phone pressed against my ear. Then the person outside spoke, and it was worse than any scream or threat could have been. A normal voice, conversational, almost friendly. "I know you're in there with them. I knocked first. That was me being polite." The voice belonged to a woman, maybe middle-aged with this slight rural Kentucky accent. "You shouldn't have called anyone. Now it's all messed up. The timing, the way it was supposed to happen." She sighed, like she was genuinely disappointed. "I've been watching this house for months, learned their schedules when they'd need a babysitter. You're earlier than usual tonight. That wasn't part of the plan." My mind raced trying to place the voice, but I'd never heard it before. She kept talking through the door, calm as if we were chatting over coffee. "The Andersons don't know me, but I know them. Know that Nancy leaves that laundry room window unlocked. Know that doctor husband of hers keeps cash in his office downstairs, hidden in that ugly ceramic vase. Know those kids' names, their bedtimes, their favorite snacks." She tapped on the door, just once, gentle. "See, I used to live in this house, 20 years ago before the bank took it, before my whole life fell apart in these rooms. My daughter's nursery was where little Noah sleeps now. Painted it yellow myself, though they've covered it with that blue. Coming back here, walking through at night when everyone's sleeping, it's the only time it feels like home again." Her voice cracked slightly. "But you had to go and ruin it. Had to be awake, had to see me, had to make those calls. Now they'll arrest me and I'll never get to walk through my house again." The shadow under the door shifted, and I heard her slide down to sit against the wall. "The message on the window was for next time, but there won't be a next time now, will there?" Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The woman stood up quickly. "They're here faster than I thought they'd be." Her footsteps moved away from the bathroom door, back toward the stairs. "You take good care of those babies. They sleep so peaceful, don't they? I never meant any harm. Just wanted to walk through my old life sometimes. Remember when things made sense." I heard her going down the stairs, not rushing but not dawdling either. The front door opened. She must have unlocked it from the inside. Through the small bathroom window, I could see red and blue lights flashing across the trees. The dispatcher was saying something about staying put until deputies cleared the house, but I was focused on listening to what was happening downstairs. Car doors slamming, shouts, the woman's voice, tired now. "I'm not armed. I used to live here, that's all. I just wanted to come home." There was a scuffle, commands to get on the ground, the metallic click of handcuffs. Chloe was crying quietly, and I held her tighter, Noah finally stirring in the tub. 2 deputies eventually came upstairs, announced themselves, and told us it was safe. Later, after the kids were back in their beds and I'd given my statement 4 different times, one of the older deputies told me her name was Judith Brennan. She lost the house in 2007 after her husband died and left behind massive medical debt. Her daughter had passed away from leukemia in what was now Noah's room. She'd been breaking into the house for almost a year, always when the family was gone, never taking anything, just walking through the rooms. The Andersons had noticed small things, furniture slightly moved, windows they thought they'd locked found unlocked, that kind of thing, but assumed they were misremembering. Tonight was different because she knew they'd hired a babysitter, thought I'd fall asleep on the couch like apparently the girl before me used to do. When I stayed awake, when I noticed her, she panicked and tried to scare me into leaving. The message she traced on the kitchen window while I was hiding upstairs, "Don't open the door again," wasn't a threat. According to her, it was advice. She didn't want anyone else letting strangers into what she still considered her home. The Andersons came back that night, cutting their conference short. They moved 2 months later. I never babysat there again, but sometimes I drive past that house and wonder if Judith still watches it from somewhere in the darkness, waiting to go home. My student loans had just hit 5 figures when I downloaded the rideshare app that October. I'd been staring at my laptop screen in my cramped studio apartment near the University of Oklahoma, doing the math for the 100th time, trying to figure out how to stretch my work-study paycheck from the campus bookstore to cover rent, food, and gas for my 2009 Honda Accord. The solution was obvious. I needed another income stream. My cousin had been driving for one of those apps in Dallas and claimed she made decent money on weekends, especially late nights when surge pricing kicked in. I figured Norman had enough bars and enough students without cars that I could make it work. Plus, the Accord had just passed inspection. The interior was clean enough, and I'd always been good with directions even before GPS made it idiot-proof. 6 weeks into this side gig, I'd developed a routine. Thursday through Saturday nights from 10 until around 2 in the morning, sometimes later if the money was flowing. That Friday night had been steady but unremarkable. I'd already made 4 trips by the time midnight rolled around. 2 sorority girls heading to Bricktown, an older gentleman who needed a ride home from his shift at the hospital, a group of grad students bar hopping on Campus Corner, and a very drunk guy who spent the entire ride showing me pictures of his German Shepherd. My earnings were sitting at about $70 after gas, which meant I could actually buy something besides instant noodles that week. I was parked in a McDonald's parking lot, scrolling through my phone and debating whether to call it a night, when the app chimed with another ride request. The pickup location made me pause. It was way out by the abandoned warehouses near the Canadian River, at least 15 minutes from where I was sitting, but the estimated fare showed $28, and the destination just said, River Area. Vague, but not unusual. Sometimes people put in general areas and gave specific directions once you picked them up. The drive out there took me through parts of Norman I usually avoided after dark. The streetlights got fewer and farther between as I headed south, following the GPS through neighborhoods where half the houses had plywood over the windows and cars sat on blocks in front yards. My headlights swept across empty lots full of tall grass and the occasional shopping cart tipped on its side. The radio started picking up more static than music, so I switched it off and drove in silence except for the GPS's occasional continue straight. When I finally reached the pickup spot, it was just a gravel pull-off next to a rusted gate that had probably once led to some kind of factory or processing plant. A single streetlight about 50 yards away cast this weak orange glow that made everything look sickly. I couldn't see anyone at first, and I was about to cancel the ride and get out of there when a figure stepped out from behind a concrete barrier near the fence. The man who approached my car moved with this weird, deliberate slowness, like he was being careful about each step. He wore a long wool coat that looked expensive but old-fashioned, the kind with a high collar that businessmen wore in those black and white movies my grandmother used to watch. His face was hard to make out in the dim light, but I could see he was clean-shaven with dark hair combed straight back, with what looked like too much product. When he opened the back door and slid in, the dome light illuminated him for just a second. Pale skin, maybe mid-40s, with these deep-set eyes that didn't quite meet mine in the rearview mirror. "Good evening," he said, and his voice had this formal quality to it, like someone who'd learned English from old textbooks. "I need to go to the old houses near the river, the historic ones." I asked him for a specific address, explaining that I needed something to put into the GPS, but he just waved his hand dismissively. "Just drive toward the river. I'll tell you when we're close." I started driving, heading east toward where I knew the Canadian River curved through town. The app was showing an error message when I tried to input the destination, just spinning endlessly, so I had to rely on his directions. Every few minutes he'd lean forward slightly and tell me to turn left or right, always in that same measured tone. Left at the stop sign, right after the yellow house, straight through this intersection. What made my chest tighten was that each turn took us through neighborhoods I knew well. First past the elementary school where I'd tutored kids for community service credits, then by the park where my study group sometimes met on sunny days. We were heading toward the older residential areas on the east side, where professors and longtime residents lived in those big Victorian-style houses with wraparound porches. The closer we got to my own neighborhood, the more I kept checking the mirrors, watching him sit perfectly still in the back seat, his hands folded in his lap like he was in church. After about 10 minutes of this guided tour through increasingly familiar streets, I couldn't ignore it anymore. We were definitely heading toward my apartment complex, not just the general area, but taking the exact route I drove home every night. When we passed the convenience store where I bought milk every Sunday, only 3 blocks from my building, I finally spoke up. "Hey, these old houses by the river, can you be more specific? Because we're getting pretty far from the Canadian River now." He didn't answer right away, just stared out the window at the passing houses. Then in that same calm voice he said, "Rivers change course over time. The old maps showed different paths." That response made absolutely no sense, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to pull over and tell him to get out. But we were so close to my neighborhood that I worried he might already know where I lived, and I didn't want to escalate things while we were alone on a dark street. When we turned onto Sycamore Avenue, my street, I made a split-second decision to drive past my apartment building and keep going toward the actual historic district another mile east. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. I watched him in the rearview mirror, trying to see if he was looking at the buildings we passed, if he was checking the numbers, if he recognized where we were. But he just sat there with this blank expression, occasionally glancing down at something in his lap. That's when I noticed he had a piece of paper, folded into a small square, that he kept turning over in his fingers. "The house with the blue trim," he suddenly said, and my whole body went rigid. My apartment building had blue trim around the windows. It was one of the reasons I'd chosen it, because it reminded me of my parents' house back in Tulsa. "What house with blue trim?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "There are several around here." He leaned forward then, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something sharp and medicinal, like old aftershave mixed with hospital disinfectant. "You know which one," he said quietly. I slammed on the brakes right there in the middle of the street, not caring anymore about being polite or professional. My finger was already on the emergency button on my phone that would call 911, and I turned around to face him directly. "Get out of my car, right now. The ride is over." But when I turned around, the back seat was empty. The door on the passenger side was hanging wide open, interior light illuminating the worn fabric seats. But he was gone. Not walking away, not running down the street, just gone. I sat there for maybe 5 seconds, too stunned to move before scrambling to check that all my doors were locked. That's when I saw it, the piece of paper he'd been holding, now unfolded and sitting on the middle of the back seat. With shaking fingers, I reached back and grabbed it. It was an old map, the kind from a gas station, probably from the 80s based on the faded colors and style. Someone had drawn a red circle around a specific spot, and when I looked closer, my entire body went cold. It was my apartment building, not just the street or the block, but the exact building, with my unit number written in small, neat handwriting next to it. Apartment 237. I drove straight to the police station, not even thinking about going home. The map was clutched in my hand the entire time, wrinkled from my sweaty grip. The officer at the front desk, a tired-looking woman with graying hair pulled back in a bun, listened to my story with the kind of patient expression that told me she'd heard stranger things. She took the map, put it in an evidence bag, and had me fill out a report. When I showed her the ride request on my phone app, though, her expression changed. There was no record of the pickup, no ride history, no payment pending, nothing. According to the app, my last ride had been the drunk guy with the German Shepherd photos, completed at 12:47 a.m. It was now 2:15 a.m., and according to my phone, I'd somehow lost over an hour. The officer suggested maybe the app had glitched. Maybe someone had tried to request a ride and it hadn't gone through properly, but we both knew that didn't explain the map or how he knew my address. They sent a patrol car to follow me home and check my apartment before I went inside. The two officers, both younger guys who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, walked through each room while I waited in the hallway. They checked the closets, looked behind the shower curtain, even opened the kitchen cabinets for some reason. "All clear," one of them told me, handing back my keys. "Make sure you lock up tight, maybe put a chair under the doorknob if it makes you feel better." After they left, I did exactly that. Chair under the doorknob, kitchen knife on my nightstand, every light in the apartment blazing. I didn't sleep that night, just sat on my couch watching the door and jumping at every sound from the hallway. Around sunrise, I finally started to doze off when I heard something that made me bolt upright. The distinct sound of paper sliding under my door. I crept over, knife in hand, and saw it. Another folded piece of paper. This time it was a receipt from a hardware store dated that morning, 6:23 a.m. Someone had purchased a single item, a copy of a key. The billing address at the bottom was mine, and the last 4 digits of the credit card matched my own. I called 911 immediately, my voice cracking as I explained about the receipt. While I waited for the police to arrive again, I called my credit card company from my laptop, hands trembling as I typed in my account information. There it was, a pending charge from Hartman's Hardware, time-stamped exactly as the receipt showed. The woman on the phone assured me they would reverse the charge and flag it as fraud, but that didn't explain how someone had my card information or why they wanted me to know they'd copied a key. When the police arrived this time, it was a different officer, an older man named Officer Briggs, who actually seemed to take me seriously. He bagged the receipt and called for a locksmith to come change all my locks immediately, on the department's dime. While we waited for the locksmith, he sat with me in my living room and asked detailed questions about the man from the ride, writing everything down in a small notebook. "Has anyone been following you lately? Any weird encounters at work or school? Ex-boyfriends, rejected guys from dating apps, anything like that?" I told him no to everything, but then remembered something that made my breath catch in my throat. About 3 weeks earlier, I'd given a ride to another passenger late at night, a younger guy who'd been completely silent the entire trip except for one comment. When we'd passed my neighborhood, I'd noticed because we took the same exit off the highway, he'd said, "Nice area, safe, good for young women living alone." I'd thought it was a creepy thing to say, but figured he was just making awkward small talk. Now I wondered if he'd been fishing for information, if maybe he'd watched me drive home after dropping him off. Officer Briggs wrote it all down and promised they'd pull security footage from the hardware store, check traffic cameras from that night, do everything they could. The locksmith arrived and spent 2 hours replacing every lock, even adding a deadbolt to my bedroom door at my request. For the next 3 days, I stayed with my cousin in Oklahoma City, too scared to be alone in my apartment. When I finally went back, Officer Briggs called with an update. They'd found the man on the hardware store security footage. Tall, wool coat, same description I'd given. But his face was always turned away from the cameras, like he knew exactly where each one was positioned. The credit card fraud department traced the breach to a skimmer that had been found on an ATM near campus, one I'd used the week before. As for the man himself, he'd paid cash at the hardware store and left no other trail. I quit driving for the rideshare app that same day, deleted it from my phone without even cashing out my final earnings. The money wasn't worth it anymore. I broke my lease 2 weeks later, taking the financial hit to move in with 3 other girls from my economics class who needed a 4th roommate for a house near campus. My new room was on the 2nd floor with a window that faced the backyard, no street access, and I made sure to vary my route home every day, never falling into a pattern. For months afterward, I'd wake up at night thinking I heard paper sliding under my door, but it was always just the wind or the house settling. Officer Briggs checked in with me periodically for about 6 months, always asking if I'd noticed anyone following me or if anything else strange had happened. Nothing ever did. The man with the wool coat never tried to contact me again, never showed up at my new place, just vanished as suddenly as he'd appeared in my back seat that night. Sometimes I wonder if he got what he wanted, just to scare me. to prove he could find me, to show me how vulnerable I was driving strangers around in the dark. The strangest part came almost a year later when I was cleaning out my old backpack to donate it. In one of the inner pockets, I found another piece of that same old map, folded into a tiny square. This piece showed a different part of Norman, an area I'd never been to, with another red circle drawn around what looked like an empty lot near the river. I gave it to Officer Briggs, who had it tested for fingerprints, but like everything else connected to that night, it led nowhere. He mentioned that they'd had 2 other reports from rideshare drivers about similar incidents, passengers who knew too much, who gave directions to the driver's own neighborhoods, who disappeared leaving behind cryptic messages or items. None of the cases were ever solved, and the police theorized it might be someone with a fascination for scaring young women, someone who studied their routines through the apps and credit card records. They increased patrols around the areas where drivers typically waited for rides and sent out warnings through the rideshare companies, but as far as I know, they never caught anyone. I still have nightmares sometimes about that cologne smell, that measured voice saying, "You know which one," and the way he just vanished from my back seat. I work at a call center now, boring but safe, and I take the bus everywhere even though I still have my Honda. Some nights when I'm walking home from the bus stop, I catch myself looking back, checking if anyone's following, wondering if somewhere out there he's still requesting rides, still studying his maps, still leaving his calling cards for other terrified drivers to find. The October wind had that particular bite to it when I pulled into the Sunoco station just outside Harrisburg that night, the kind that makes you zip your jacket all the way up, even though you're only stepping out for a minute. I'd been driving freight trucks for about 12 years at that point, and my daughter had just started middle school that fall, which meant I was pushing harder to get home each evening instead of crashing at the depot like I used to. The station sat at the intersection where Highway 83 meets that stretch of nothing before you hit the suburbs, one of those places that feels abandoned even when there are people around. The fluorescent lights above the pumps kept flickering, creating these weird shadows that danced across the concrete, and I remember thinking they really needed to fix those before someone had a seizure. My Silverado's tank was running on fumes, and I still had another 40 minutes before I'd see my driveway, so stopping wasn't really optional. I swiped my card and started pumping, doing that thing where you lean against the truck bed and zone out while watching the numbers climb on the display. The only other customer was some guy in a rust-covered sedan 3 pumps over, already pulling away, leaving just me and the teenage clerk visible through the store windows, his face lit blue by his phone screen. That's when I heard footsteps, quick ones, almost like someone was jogging, and this woman appeared from around the side of the building where they keep the air pump and vacuum cleaners. She looked maybe 40, wearing a navy cardigan that was way too thin for the weather, jeans with mud stains on the knees, and these white sneakers that squeaked against the wet pavement. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had mostly fallen apart, blonde strands sticking to her forehead with sweat despite the cold, and she had this way of glancing behind her every few seconds that immediately put me on edge. "Excuse me, sir, I'm really sorry to bother you," she said, and her voice had this raspy quality like she'd been yelling or crying recently, maybe both. She stayed about 6 feet away from me, which I appreciated because it meant she wasn't trying to get too close too fast. But her eyes kept darting between my face and the road behind the station. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but there's been this car following me for the past 20 minutes, ever since I left the Walmart over in Camp Hill, and I pulled in here hoping they'd keep going, but they didn't." She wrapped her arms around herself, and I could see her fingernails were painted this chipped purple color, with dirt underneath them like she'd been digging in garden soil. "My phone's dead, and I just need a ride to my sister's place down on Paxton Street. It's literally 5 minutes from here. I can show you exactly where if you have GPS. Now, I've got 2 younger sisters myself, and I'd want someone to help them if they were in trouble. But I've also been around long enough to know that gas stations at night are where bad decisions often start." The pump clicked off at exactly $42.17. and I stood there holding the nozzle, trying to figure out if this woman was genuinely scared or if this was some kind of setup. That's when I noticed it. This dark blue Chrysler 300 parked behind the dumpster area where deliveries get unloaded. Positioned so you'd miss it unless you were really looking. The engine was definitely running because I could see exhaust coming from the tailpipe in the cold air, but the headlights were completely off, and through the windshield I could make out two shapes in the front seats, just sitting there, perfectly still. The woman must have seen me notice them because she grabbed my wrist, not hard but desperate, and her palm was ice cold and clammy against my skin. "Please, they're right there, you can see them yourself," she whispered, and now her whole body was trembling, these little shudders that made her cardigan shake. I tried to lose them by taking random turns, even drove through a McDonald's drive-thru without ordering anything, but they stayed right behind me the whole time. She let go of my wrist and pulled out a wallet from her back pocket, flipping it open to show me a driver's license with her picture on it, though I couldn't read the name in the dim light. "Look, I'm a real person. I work at the CVS pharmacy on Union Deposit Road. I'm not trying to rob you or anything crazy like that. I just need to get away from those people." Her voice cracked on the word people, and she kept rubbing her arms like she was trying to warm up, but I could tell it was more about nerves than cold. The Chrysler's engine suddenly revved, not loud enough to seem aggressive, but just enough to let us know they were paying attention, and the woman actually stepped closer to my truck, putting it between her and them. I put the gas nozzle back and screwed my cap on, taking my time while I tried to think through the situation. Part of me wanted to just tell her to go inside and ask the clerk to call the cops, but another part kept thinking about my daughter, how I'd lose my mind if some creep was following her around. "All right, here's what we're going to do," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my pulse was hammering. "You're going to get in the passenger side, but keep your hands where I can see them the whole time, and we're going to drive straight to the police station on South Cameron Street, not your sister's place." She nodded so fast I thought she might give herself whiplash, already moving toward the passenger door. But that's when things got weird in a way that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. The driver's side door of the Chrysler opened, and this man stepped out, probably 6'3", wearing a black pea coat and jeans, completely normal looking except for the fact that he was wearing sunglasses at 9:30 at night. He didn't walk toward us, just stood there beside his car, hands in his pockets, facing our direction like he was waiting for something. The woman practically dove into my truck, slamming the door and immediately hitting the lock button, then fumbling with the seatbelt like her fingers weren't working right. Through the windshield, I could see the second person in the Chrysler lean forward, and the dashboard light illuminated their face for just a second. Another man, younger maybe, with a baseball cap pulled low. "Drive, please just drive," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper, and she was crouched down in the seat like she was trying to make herself smaller. I started the engine and put it in drive, purposely taking the route that would bring us past the front of the store where the cameras were, and as we pulled away, I watched in my mirrors as the tall man got back into the Chrysler, smooth and unhurried like he had all the time in the world. They didn't turn their headlights on until we were already on the access road, and then those bright HIDs blazed to life, staying exactly 3 car lengths behind us no matter how I adjusted my speed. "What did you do to piss these guys off?" I asked, trying to sound casual while my knuckles went white on the steering wheel. The woman was twisted around in her seat, watching them through the back window, and her breathing was coming in these short, sharp gasps like she might hyperventilate. "I don't know them, I swear to God I don't know them," she said, and her voice had this raw edge of genuine terror that's hard to fake. "I was just shopping for groceries, normal Wednesday night stuff, and when I came out they were parked right next to my car, just sitting there with the engine running." She turned back around and pressed her palms against her eyes like she was trying to push away a headache. At first I thought maybe they were waiting for someone else, but then they followed me out of the parking lot, and every turn I made, every lane change, they were right there. The Chrysler suddenly accelerated, closing the gap between us to maybe 1 car length, and their high beams flashed twice, deliberate and measured. I pressed harder on the gas, my truck's V8 responding immediately, and took a sharp right onto Industrial Road without using my signal, tires squealing slightly on the cold asphalt. The Chrysler made the turn perfectly, like they knew exactly what I was going to do before I did it. And now they were riding our bumper so close, I could see the tall man's face in my rearview mirror, still wearing those sunglasses, his expression completely blank. The woman started digging through her purse frantically, pulling out a dead iPhone, some crumpled receipts, a prescription bottle that rattled with pills, and finally a small canister of pepper spray that she clutched like a lifeline. "The police station is just another 2 miles, I said, trying to reassure both of us. But then the Chrysler did something that made my whole body go rigid. They pulled into the oncoming traffic lane like they were going to pass us, except there was a semi-truck barreling toward us from the opposite direction, headlights blazing, horn blaring in one long, terrified note. For 3 seconds that felt like hours. The Chrysler stayed right beside us, the passenger window rolled down, and the younger man was pointing something at us. Not a gun, but a phone, recording everything. Then they dropped back behind us just as the semi roared past, missing them by maybe 2 feet, the wind from it rocking my truck sideways. "Jesus Christ, they're insane," I muttered, my heart slamming against my ribs, and I grabbed my own phone from the cup holder, trying to dial 911 while keeping us on the road. The woman was sobbing now, real ugly, crying with snot and everything, her pepper spray hand shaking so bad I was worried she'd accidentally spray us both. "They're going to kill us, they're actually going to kill us," she kept saying, rocking back and forth in the seat. And I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I wasn't sure anymore. The 911 operator picked up just as the Chrysler rammed us from behind, not hard enough to spin us out, but enough to jolt us forward, my phone flying out of my hand and sliding under the seat. The woman screamed, this piercing shriek that made my ears ring, and in the mirror I could see the tall man had taken his sunglasses off finally, revealing eyes that were completely calm, almost bored looking, like this was just another Wednesday night for him. That's what scared me most. Not the aggression, but the casual indifference, like we were just items on a checklist he needed to cross off. I yanked the wheel hard left onto a side street, tires screaming against the pavement, and floored it past dark houses where normal people were probably watching TV or getting ready for bed, completely unaware of the nightmare playing out 30 feet from their front doors. The Chrysler stayed with us, their engine roaring as they matched every move, and I could hear the woman hyperventilating beside me, these ragged gasps between sobs that sounded like she might pass out. "There's a fire station up here," I shouted, remembering it from my routes. Always people there, always lit up, and sure enough I could see those bright bay doors glowing like salvation about a quarter mile ahead. But the Chrysler must have realized where we were heading because they suddenly accelerated hard, pulling alongside us again. And this time the passenger window was all the way down and the younger man was leaning out, holding something that glinted in the streetlights. Not a gun, but a tire iron. And he swung it at my side mirror with this controlled precision that shattered it completely, glass exploding across the side of my truck. The woman went silent, that kind of shocked quiet that's somehow worse than screaming, and I could see her lips moving like she was praying, but no sound was coming out. We were maybe 500 feet from the fire station when the Chrysler suddenly slammed on their brakes and spun into a perfect J-turn, heading back the way we'd come like they'd never been chasing us at all. I skidded into the fire station lot, barely missing a parked ambulance, and stopped right in front of the open bay where 3 firefighters were washing a truck. They looked up, startled, water hoses still in their hands, as I basically fell out of my door on legs that felt like jelly. The woman stayed in the truck, still clutching that pepper spray, staring at nothing with eyes that had seen too much. The firefighters called the cops, and 2 officers showed up within minutes, taking our statements while we sat on a bench outside the station. The woman wrapped in one of those silver emergency blankets even though she insisted she wasn't cold. They found the Chrysler abandoned about 2 miles away. Stolen plates, interior wiped clean, like professionals had been using it. The really sick part came 3 days later when I saw on the news that they'd found a woman's body in a drainage ditch off Highway 83. and while they never confirmed it was connected, the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. The woman I'd helped disappeared from the fire station while I was giving my second statement to the detectives. Just gone, like she'd never existed, leaving only that prescription bottle she'd dropped in my truck. The label was torn where the name should have been, but I could make out part of an address in Mechanicsburg. I drove by once, about a month later, and it was just an empty lot with a for sale sign, grass grown tall like nothing had ever been built there. I still take a different route home now, even though it adds 20 minutes to my drive, and sometimes I wake up thinking about those calm, bored eyes in my rearview mirror, and wondering if maybe I wasn't the one being tested that night, if maybe she was exactly where she was supposed to be, and I was just the random factor they hadn't counted on. The GPS died right when we needed it most, somewhere between Clearfield and Bellefonte, on a stretch of Route 322 that seemed forgotten by time. I remember joking with Vanessa about how we were probably the youngest people to drive through here since the Clinton administration. We just celebrated my 31st birthday the week before, and this spontaneous trip to visit her sister in State College was supposed to be a fun detour from our usual Philadelphia routine. The engine started making that grinding noise around 9 at night, just as the last traces of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. We managed to coast into the gravel parking lot of a place called the Whispering Pines Motor Lodge, though the neon sign had half its letters burnt out so it read more like W is ring P-E's. Vanessa grabbed my arm as we sat there in the sudden silence of the dead engine, both of us staring at the single lit window in what looked like the office. A yellowish glow that seemed too warm, too inviting for a place that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. The man behind the desk must have been watching us from that window because he opened the door before we even made it halfway across the parking lot, standing there with this huge grin that showed all his teeth. "Car trouble?" he called out, and something about the way he said it made me think he already knew the answer. His name tag read Leonard, and he had this way of standing too close when he talked, like he was sharing a secret even when he was just telling us about the rooms. He kept insisting we take room 7, right next to the office, saying it was their best one with the newest mattress and the strongest water pressure, practically pushing the key into my hand before I'd even finished filling out the registration card. Vanessa tried asking about calling a tow service, but Leonard just kept nodding and smiling, saying, tomorrow, everything's closed now, you folks just get some rest." The way he watched us walk to our room, standing in that doorway with the light behind him casting his shadow all the way across the parking lot, I kept thinking about how a spider must look to a fly, patient and still and somehow satisfied. Room 7 had that smell all old motels have, like carpet cleaner fighting a losing battle against decades of cigarette smoke and mildew. The wallpaper was this faded green pattern that looked like eyes when you weren't looking directly at it, and the bed made a sound like breaking bones when we sat down to test it. Vanessa went straight to the bathroom while I played with the television, trying to get anything other than static on the ancient box that probably predated cable itself. That's when I noticed the connecting door to room 8, painted the same ugly beige as the walls, but with fresh scratches around the deadbolt, like someone had tried to open it from the other side recently. The vent above it was enormous, one of those old metal grates that probably connected the whole row of rooms for heating, and I could swear I heard something moving through it, a soft shuffling like fabric against metal. Leonard had been so insistent about us taking this room, and now, looking at that door with its single deadbolt and those scratches, I wondered what was on the other side that made room 7 so special. We tried to settle in for the night, telling ourselves we'd deal with everything in the morning when the sun was up, and the world made sense again. Vanessa found a deck of cards in the nightstand drawer, along with a Bible that had whole pages torn out and what looked like fingernail marks on the cover, and we played a few hands of rummy just to have something normal to focus on. Around 11:30, just as we were thinking about trying to sleep, we heard it. 3 soft knocks on the connecting door, so gentle they could have been accidental, except they came in a perfect rhythm: knock, pause, knock, pause, knock. We both went completely still, cards forgotten on the bedspread between us, waiting to see if we'd imagined it. Then came the whispering through the vent. 2 voices maybe, or 3, having what sounded like an argument in hushed tones, the words just unclear enough that we couldn't make them out, but distinct enough that we knew they were words. I pressed my ear against the wall and heard what sounded like furniture being quietly moved, dragging sounds across carpet, and then Leonard's voice, clear as day, saying, "They're perfect, absolutely perfect." Vanessa grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks, her eyes wide in the dim light from the bathroom we'd left on, and we both knew we needed to get out of that room immediately. I crept to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain just an inch, trying to see if anyone was in the parking lot, and that's when I realized the office was completely dark, not just closed but abandoned looking, like it had been empty for hours. Our car sat there useless in the same spot, and beyond it, parked behind the office where we hadn't noticed it before, was a white van with mud-covered plates and what looked like heavy blankets covering the back windows. The whispering from the vent stopped suddenly, replaced by a silence that was somehow worse, like everyone on the other side of that door was holding their breath, waiting. I motioned for Vanessa to grab our things, moving as quietly as possible, shoving our phones and wallets into our pockets, leaving everything else behind. We had made it to the main door, my hand on the deadbolt, when we heard the unmistakable sound of a key sliding into the lock of the connecting door from the other side. The deadbolt on the connecting door held, but we could hear multiple keys jingling, someone trying different ones, and Leonard's voice came through the vent again, no longer whispering but speaking in a normal tone like he knew we could hear him. "Now don't make this difficult, folks. We've done this 12 times before without any fuss." Those words hit me like ice water, 12 times before, and suddenly every news story I'd ever ignored about missing couples flashed through my mind. Vanessa was already at the main door, turning the lock as quietly as she could, but it wouldn't budge, like it had been secured from the outside somehow. The window was our only option, one of those old motel windows that's supposed to slide sideways but has been painted shut so many times it might as well be welded closed. I grabbed the desk chair and swung it at the glass while Vanessa pushed the dresser against the connecting door, which was now rattling violently as someone threw their weight against it. The window exploded outward in a shower of glass, and cold October air rushed in, bringing with it the sound of doors opening all along the motel. Not just 1 or 2, but what sounded like every single room emptying out at once. We went through that window like our lives depended on it, which they did. Vanessa first and then me. Both of us landing hard on the concrete sidewalk outside, glass crunching under our feet. Behind us, I could hear the connecting door finally give way, wood splintering as the dresser toppled over, and Leonard's voice shouting instructions to someone named Carl about blocking the highway. We ran toward the tree line behind the motel, about 50 yards of open ground that felt like miles, and I could hear footsteps spreading out behind us. Not just 1 or 2 people, but what sounded like a dozen, their feet hitting the gravel in an organized pattern like they'd done this before, like they knew exactly how to hunt people in the dark. The woods were thick with undergrowth that tore at our clothes and faces, but we pushed through, Vanessa's hand in mine, both of us breathing so hard it hurt, branches snapping under our feet loud enough to give away our position to anyone listening. Behind us, flashlight beams cut through the trees in coordinated sweeps, and I heard Leonard's voice, calm and almost amused. They always run to the woods every single time. The ground suddenly dropped away beneath us, and we tumbled down a steep embankment, rolling through dead leaves and mud until we splashed into a creek at the bottom, the freezing water shocking us both into silence. We pressed ourselves against the bank, hidden under the overhang of roots and earth, listening to the footsteps above us moving in a line, systematic and patient like they were grid-searching the area. Vanessa was shaking so hard I had to hold her tight to keep her teeth from chattering and giving us away, and we stayed there in that freezing water for what must have been an hour, maybe more, listening to our hunters move back and forth above us, occasionally calling out to each other in code words that meant nothing to us, but clearly meant something to them. At one point, someone walked right above our hiding spot, dirt and pebbles raining down on us, and we held our breath until spots danced in my vision. Then gradually the sounds moved away, back toward the motel, and we heard vehicle engines starting up, multiple vehicles, and the sound of them driving away in different directions. But not all of them. We could still hear at least one engine idling in the distance, waiting. We stayed in that creek until the first hints of dawn started showing through the trees. Both of us so cold, we could barely feel our legs when we finally crawled out. Following the water downstream seemed safer than going back up the embankment, so we waded through the shallow parts, supporting each other when one of us stumbled, until we came to a place where the creek passed under a small bridge, an actual road, not just another forest trail. We climbed up to it carefully, checking both directions multiple times before stepping onto the asphalt, and that's when we saw the gas station about a quarter-mile down, its lights bright and welcoming in the early morning gloom. The attendant, a woman named Rosie according to her name tag, took one look at us, soaked, muddy, covered in cuts and scratches, and immediately called 911 while wrapping us in blankets she pulled from behind the counter. She kept asking what happened, but all I could manage was the Whispering Pines Motor Lodge, and her face went completely white. "That place has been closed for 3 years," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ever since they found those bodies in the crawl space under room 8. The state police found our car still sitting in that gravel lot, but the motel looked different in daylight. Abandoned, windows boarded up, the office door hanging open on broken hinges showing nothing but an empty room full of debris and old furniture covered in dust. Room 7's door was standing open too, and inside they found our suitcases exactly where we'd left them, but the connecting door to room 8 had been sealed with concrete blocks years ago, according to the construction date someone had written on the mortar. The officers kept exchanging looks when we insisted there had been people there, at least a dozen of them, and Leonard at the desk checking us in. But then one of them found fresh tire tracks behind the office, multiple vehicles just like we'd said, and suddenly they were taking us very seriously. They brought in dogs and more officers, and within hours they'd found the underground entrance hidden in the woods about 200 yards from the motel, a storm cellar door covered with branches that led to a tunnel system someone had dug to connect to the motel's original basement. Inside, they found mattresses, chains bolted to the walls, and personal belongings that would eventually be matched to 7 missing couples from the past 2 years. They never caught Leonard or any of the others, though the FBI got involved and set up a whole task force dedicated to finding them. The investigators told us we were lucky, that most people who get taken to places like that don't make it out, and they kept asking if we remembered any other details, any names besides Leonard and Carl, any identifying features. But trauma has a way of making things fuzzy, and all I could really remember clearly was that smile of Leonard's, and the sound of all those doors opening at once. We testified before a grand jury 6 months later, helped them put together a timeline of events, looked at hundreds of photos trying to identify anyone. But these people were ghosts. No fingerprints in the database, no DNA matches, nothing. The only real lead came from analyzing the tunnel system, which showed construction techniques consistent with mining operations from the 1980s, suggesting at least some of them had that kind of background. Vanessa and I tried to go back to normal life in Philadelphia, but we ended up moving to Colorado 2 years later, somewhere far from any rural motels, somewhere with lots of lights and people and no connecting doors in hotel rooms. The nightmares stopped eventually, mostly, though I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear that soft knocking pattern. Knock, pause, knock, pause, knock. And Vanessa can't stand the sound of keys jingling without going completely rigid. We keep in touch with Detective Morrison, who ran the investigation, and every few months he calls to tell us about another abandoned motel they've searched, another tunnel system they found, always empty by the time they get there. Like Leonard and his group just pack up and move on to the next place whenever they feel the heat getting close. The last time Morrison called, about 3 months ago, he mentioned they'd found something interesting in an abandoned motel near the West Virginia border. Registration cards in a hidden drawer, dozens of them, all filled out in different handwriting but all for room 7. and our names were there along with 23 other couples, dated over a 5-year period. Only 7 couples were ever reported missing, which means the rest either were never reported or, and this is what keeps me up at night, they're still out there somewhere in places no one's thought to look yet. Morrison thinks Leonard's group is still operating just more carefully now, maybe using campgrounds or vacation rentals instead of motels, and he always ends our calls the same way. Keep your doors locked, and if you ever break down on a rural road again, sleep in your car. The mornings back then were quiet, and the bus stop outside my neighborhood always felt strangely isolated, despite being just a few blocks from the main road. My name's Emily, and at the time I was 17, juggling early classes and a part-time job at a small bookstore. The bus shelter was made of glass panels with faint scratches that caught the morning light, and I used to lean against one of them with my headphones in, half awake, half dreaming. The street across from the stop had a row of houses that looked almost identical. Same trimmed hedges, same mailboxes tilted forward like they were listening. It was the kind of place where nothing unusual ever happened, until it did. On a Wednesday morning, I noticed a man standing across the street. He was tall, maybe in his late 40s, wearing a gray coat that looked a size too big for him. At first, I assumed he was just another commuter waiting for someone to pick him up. He had a brown paper cup in his hand and seemed focused on the traffic, barely moving. Still, something about how still he stood made me glance at him every so often. When the bus arrived, I forgot about him and went on with my day, not realizing I would start seeing him again. Every morning after that. By the 3rd day, it had become routine. I'd reach the bus stop around 7:05, and he'd already be there. Same coat, same spot, same stillness. Sometimes he'd tilt his head slightly, like he was trying to catch something in the distance. I told myself he was probably walking to work after watching his kid get on the bus or something harmless like that. But what unsettled me was how I never actually saw him leave. The bus would come, and as it pulled away, he'd still be there, standing in the same place as if frozen in a loop. It was around the 5th morning that my sense of comfort began to unravel. I had overslept and rushed out the door without my usual coffee, expecting to see the empty stop for once. But he was already there, closer this time, on my side of the street, standing near the edge of the glass shelter. He wasn't looking at me directly. His eyes were angled toward the panel beside me, almost like he was examining a reflection. That's when I realized he wasn't facing the street at all. He was watching me through the glass. The next morning, I asked my mom to drop me off instead of taking the bus. She laughed at first when I told her about the man, but I could tell from her face that she was uneasy too. That evening, she called the transportation office and asked if the shelter had security cameras, and surprisingly, they said yes. One mounted high on a nearby lamppost. The following night, we drove over there after dinner. The streetlights flickered unevenly, and the shelter's glass reflected our car headlights back at us like a warning. My mom parked, and we just sat there for a moment, watching that same spot where he used to stand. Empty, of course. We got permission from the bus company to review the footage a day later. The technician set up the recording on a small monitor, scrubbing through the mornings one by one. There he was, standing perfectly still across the street on Monday, then closer on Wednesday, then right by the shelter by Friday. But what chilled me wasn't the proximity. It was how he never looked at the road. In every clip, his gaze was locked on the glass panel, even when no bus came. When I showed up, he'd subtly angle his head, lining his eyes with mine through the reflection. Mom called the school afterward, and they contacted local police. I expected that to be the end of it. Just a creepy stranger caught on camera. But when the officer checked traffic footage from other intersections, they found something worse. He had been following the route my bus took, walking or sometimes catching another bus behind mine, all the way to school. There were short clips of him standing at corners, watching the same bus number go by every morning. The footage didn't show what he did after, but it was enough to make my stomach knot up every time I left the house. The next day, my mom drove me to school herself. I kept glancing at the sidewalks, half expecting that gray coat to appear again between cars. For a few days, nothing happened. The police said they'd patrol the area near the stop, and the driver was told to report anything strange. Then, early that Sunday before sunrise, my mom found something tucked between our front door and the frame. A crumpled bus schedule with my route circled in red ink. The police took the schedule as evidence, but there were no fingerprints. Nothing they could trace. They assumed it might have been someone from the neighborhood trying to scare me, but my mom disagreed. She started driving me everywhere. School, work, even the grocery store. I stopped going out alone. Still, the sense of being watched didn't fade. Sometimes I'd see a gray blur near the edge of a parking lot or behind a fence, and my heart would start pounding before I could even think. I could never confirm it was him, but the feeling lingered like a shadow you can't shake off. 2 weeks later, a patrol officer knocked on our door. He said they had identified the man through transit records. His name was Charles Avery, a 52-year-old who lived 3 neighborhoods away. He had been reported before for following young girls near different bus stops, but always disappeared before they could press charges. When the officer showed me his photo, it was him. The same blank stare, the same oversized coat. They issued a restraining order, but I knew that piece of paper wouldn't stop someone like him if he really wanted to find me. After that, my mom decided to move. It wasn't a dramatic move across the country, just a few towns over, but it felt like starting over. New routes, new streets, no glass shelters. For months, I refused to stand near bus stops or anything reflective. Even mirrors made me uneasy. The police said they hadn't seen him again, but I caught myself checking rearview mirrors and windows, expecting those eyes to appear behind me in the faint reflection of glass. It has been years now, and I still take a different route home every week, just in case. I never saw him again, but every morning when the light hits a bus shelter or a store window, I can't help but glance at the reflection before I step closer. Sometimes I think about how long he must have been there before I ever noticed him. How many times he might have been watching, hidden in plain sight. The apartment my boyfriend and I moved into last spring was small, but it finally felt like ours. We were both working late shifts back then, and the building had this quiet hum at night, like everything outside the walls just stopped existing. It should have felt peaceful, but sometimes that silence felt too heavy, almost expectant. About 2 weeks after settling in, we started hearing footsteps in the hallway after midnight. Not quick ones, slow, steady, and always stopping near our door. We laughed it off at first, telling ourselves it was probably a neighbor getting home late or the pipes creaking. But every night, around the same time, the sound returned, pausing right outside like someone was listening. After the 3rd night, my boyfriend Ethan decided to check through the peephole. He said the hallway was empty, lights dim, nothing moving except for the shadow of the plant near the stairwell. Still, I could tell by the way his voice tightened that it bothered him. The next morning, we found a faint smudge on the lower part of the door, like someone had brushed their hand there. It was oily, grayish, almost like residue from a glove. That was when we agreed to install a security camera outside the door. Ethan ordered one online that could stream directly to our phones. He spent half of Saturday afternoon setting it up, double-checking every angle until the hallway looked perfectly centered in the frame. For a few nights, things went quiet. I would check the camera feed before bed and feel this small sense of relief, seeing nothing but the still hallway and the dim light flickering above the elevator. Then, about a week later, I woke up around 3 in the morning and instinctively opened the app. The live feed showed someone standing at the far end of the hallway, just where the light started to fade. They were facing our direction, not moving. The person didn't come closer, didn't knock, just stood there. I woke Ethan, but by the time he grabbed his phone, the figure was gone. We replayed the clip, but for some reason the motion detection hadn't saved it. The next day, Ethan adjusted the sensitivity settings and set up notifications. We tried to go back to normal, convincing ourselves maybe it was a glitch or maybe one of the neighbors wandering half asleep. A few days later, though, we checked the recordings again, and there he was. Same spot, same hour, 2:37 in the morning. The figure stood right at the edge of the camera's view, barely lit, wearing what looked like a dark jacket. The face was impossible to make out, but what unnerved me most was the posture, perfectly still, like he was waiting for something. We decided to keep watching over the next few nights before calling the police, hoping maybe it would stop on its own. That night, Ethan and I sat up together, watching the live feed until after 3. Nothing happened. Around 2:37, the hallway remained empty, the camera showing only the hum of that faint light. We were about to shut off our phones when a shadow flickered at the far edge of the frame, not entering, just lingering. It looked like a shoulder, the curve of someone standing half behind the corner. The motion alert went off and Ethan leaned forward, whispering something like, "He's back." But again, the moment we tried zooming in, the figure disappeared. It was as if the camera glitched the exact second we focused on him. By then, sleep was impossible. We emailed the footage to the property manager and asked if there had been any reports of someone wandering the halls. He replied the next morning saying the building was quiet and there were no maintenance staff working overnight. He even checked the other floor cameras, but ours was the only one showing that dark silhouette. That reply didn't bring much comfort. It only made the whole thing feel more targeted. Like whoever that man was, he had chosen our floor for a reason. Ethan tried to laugh about it, calling it our personal ghost, but the joke landed flat. 2 days later, I went through the recordings while Ethan was at work. My hands were trembling slightly, partly from lack of sleep. Every night, exactly 2:37, the same shape appeared. Same spot, same stillness. But when I paused the latest clip, I noticed something different. A faint logo on the man's jacket sleeve. I zoomed in as far as the grainy footage allowed, and the words, "Swift Drop Delivery" came into view. I had never heard of that company before. I checked online, expecting to find some local courier service, but there was nothing. No listings, no reviews, not even a logo match. Ethan called the police that evening. 2 officers came by, reviewed the footage, and took a copy with them. They told us they'd try enhancing it. The younger one, Officer Delgado, asked if we'd recently ordered any packages or groceries. We hadn't. When he came back a few days later, his tone had changed. Quieter, more serious. He said the footage enhancement showed the man's jacket clearly, and that Swift Drop Delivery wasn't a registered business in our city. It didn't even exist in the state database. When Ethan asked if they could track the logo or uniform, Delgado hesitated before saying, "That's the strange part. This logo was used by a company that shut down 8 years ago, after one of their drivers went missing on his route." After hearing that, I barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made me tense up, waiting for the next notification. Ethan wanted to take the camera down for a while, said it was making us paranoid, but I refused. If that man came back, I wanted proof. The next night, I left the live feed running on my phone while we tried to rest. The hours dragged by until 2:37 arrived again. This time, the camera picked him up closer, not right by the door, but a few feet nearer than before. He stood there for about 10 seconds, then turned his head slightly toward the lens as if acknowledging it. Then he walked out of frame, disappearing into the stairwell. Ethan ran into the hallway seconds later, phone flashlight on, but the place was empty. No sound of footsteps, no movement. When he came back in, he was pale and said the air in the hallway smelled faintly like gasoline. We checked the footage again and froze at what we saw. Before leaving, the man had set something down by the stairwell, a small brown parcel. The police came immediately after we called. The package contained nothing but an old photo, wrapped in a delivery invoice from Swift Drop dated 8 years ago. The name on it was unfamiliar to us, but the address printed below was our apartment number. Officer Delgado said they'd investigate the name. He came back 2 days later with an update that made my chest tighten. The name on that invoice belonged to the previous tenant. a man who'd gone missing nearly a decade ago, right after reporting that someone had been following him home from work. Delgado didn't say much more, only that the case files mentioned a suspect wearing a delivery jacket. Ethan and I decided to move out the following week. I tried to leave the camera with the new tenant, but I could not bring myself to explain why. It has been months since then, and I still check the app out of habit, even though the camera's offline. The last clip saved before we left shows the empty hallway, time-stamped 2:37 in the morning. For a second, the light flickers, and something faint appears near the edge. A shape, maybe, or a reflection. I do not watch it anymore. The police never found the man, and Swift Drop remains a company that does not exist. But sometimes, around that hour, I wake up without reason and feel the quiet pressing in from outside, like someone's still standing there, waiting to be seen. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Snow has a sound when it falls at night, a kind of soft whisper that most people probably find peaceful. When you sleep under a bridge or tucked behind a dumpster, that whisper sounds more like a countdown. Every flake that lands on your sleeping bag is another tiny weight pressing down, another degree stolen from your body, another minute closer to the moment when you might not wake up. I turned 34 the same week the first real storm hit Omaha last January. Someone at the soup kitchen handed me a stale cupcake with a crooked candle, and I sat there staring at it for a long time before I could eat it. Not because I was ungrateful, but because birthdays on the street feel like mock celebrations, like throwing a party on a sinking ship. Another year survived, sure, but at what cost and for how much longer? Pete Garrison understood that feeling better than anyone I knew out there. We had met 2 winters prior at a warming center near the old railroad depot, both shivering so violently that our teeth chattered in unison like some broken percussion instrument. Pete was maybe 55 years old, with a gray beard stained yellow around his mouth from decades of cigarettes, and these watery blue eyes that always seemed to be searching for something he had lost and would never find again. He told me once that he had worked as a plumber for 23 years, owned a little house with a paid-off mortgage, had a wife named Ruth who made the best chicken pot pie in all of Nebraska. Then Ruth got pancreatic cancer, and 6 months later, Pete was sitting in an empty house that suddenly felt like a tomb. The grief ate him alive. He stopped showing up to work, stopped paying bills, stopped caring whether he lived or died. By the time he found himself on the streets, he said it almost felt like relief, like he had finally stopped pretending that life without Ruth was worth fighting for. That January had been brutal from the start, but the weather forecast for that particular Wednesday made even the veterans nervous. The temperature was supposed to drop to -15, with wind chills pushing it closer to -30. I remember standing outside the library on Monday afternoon, watching people rush past in their puffy jackets and heated car seats, and thinking about how fragile the line is between their world and mine. One bad month, one medical bill, one layoff, that is all it takes. The shelters were already announcing they would be over capacity, turning people away by lottery like some sick game show where the losers might freeze to death. Pete and I talked about our options that afternoon, sitting on milk crates behind the Vietnamese grocery store, where the owner sometimes let us warm up near the back vent. We decided to stick together, find a spot in the underground parking garage on Farnham Street, where the concrete held some heat from the cars coming and going. But Pete never showed up that night. I waited for him until almost 9, stomping my feet and blowing into my hands, watching my breath crystallize and disappear into the darkness. He had mentioned something about checking the recycling bins near the university. He collected cans and bottles to buy cigarettes, one of the few pleasures he had left. And I figured maybe he had found a better spot, or gotten into one of the church basements that sometimes opened during emergencies. I told myself not to worry, that Pete had survived worse winters than this, that he knew the tricks better than most. So I hunkered down alone in the corner of that parking garage, wrapped myself in every piece of fabric I owned, and tried to sleep while the wind howled outside like something hungry. My dreams were fragmented and strange, full of images of Ruth standing in a kitchen I had never seen, beckoning Pete toward a door filled with white light. I woke up around 4 in the morning, shaking uncontrollably, and I knew right then that something was wrong. The sun came up around 7:30, pale and distant like it was embarrassed to show its face after what the night had done. I started walking toward the university, retracing the route Pete usually took when he went collecting. The streets were quiet in that eerie way they get after a deep freeze. No joggers, no dog walkers, just the occasional car creeping along with frost still clinging to its windows. My boots crunched against the salted sidewalks, and every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. I checked the usual spots: the alley behind the student union where the recycling bins overflowed on weekends, the loading dock near the science building where warm air sometimes leaked from the ventilation system, the bus stop shelter on Dodge Street, where Pete liked to sit and watch the college kids go by. Nothing. No sign of him anywhere. A janitor coming out of one of the dormitories looked at me with that familiar mixture of pity and disgust, and I wanted to grab him by his clean uniform and ask if he had seen an old man with a yellow beard, but I knew how that would end. I found Pete in the narrow alley between a laundromat and a pawn shop on Leavenworth Street, about 6 blocks from where I had been searching. He was sitting upright against the brick wall, his legs stretched out in front of him, his hands resting on his thighs like he had just decided to take a break and catch his breath. For one horrible second, I thought he was alive. His eyes were open, staring straight ahead at the dumpster across from him, and there was an expression on his face that looked almost peaceful, like he had finally figured out the answer to a question that had been bothering him for years. But then I got closer and saw the frost on his eyelashes, the blue tint around his lips, the way his skin had taken on a waxy texture that no living person ever has. I said his name once, twice, 3 times, each time louder than the last, but my voice just bounced off the walls and disappeared into the frozen air. Pete was gone. He had been gone for hours, probably since sometime before midnight when the temperature had bottomed out and his body had simply surrendered to the cold. I sat down next to him on that frozen concrete, not caring anymore about preserving my own body heat, and I stayed there for what felt like an eternity. His shopping cart was parked a few feet away, still loaded with the plastic bags full of cans and bottles he had collected, maybe $8 worth if he was lucky. That is what his last hours on Earth had been spent doing, digging through trash so he could afford a pack of cigarettes and maybe a cup of coffee from the gas station. I noticed his gloves were missing, probably lost or stolen weeks ago, and his hands were bare and curled slightly inward like claws. The nails had turned a deep purple, almost black. I reached over and touched his shoulder, and it was like touching a statue, completely rigid and utterly foreign to anything resembling human warmth. A sound came out of my mouth that I did not recognize, something between a moan and a scream, and I pressed my forehead against his arm and let the grief tear through me like a winter wind, finding every crack in a broken window. Eventually, a woman walked by the alley entrance, probably on her way to work at one of the shops on the street. She glanced in, did a double take, and then pulled out her phone to call 911. I heard her voice high and panicked, describing what she saw. 2 homeless men, one possibly dead, please send someone quickly. She did not come any closer, did not ask if I was okay, did not offer any comfort at all. She just stood at the mouth of the alley with her phone pressed to her ear, watching us like we were animals at a zoo exhibit that had suddenly become disturbing instead of entertaining. The paramedics arrived about 15 minutes later, followed by a police cruiser with 2 officers who looked bored before they even got out of the car. One of them asked me if I knew the deceased, and I almost laughed at the word. Deceased, like Pete was just a file to be processed, a statistic to be recorded, a problem that had conveniently solved itself by dying in an alley where nobody important would have to see. They zipped Pete into a black body bag and loaded him into a van that did not even have windows in the back. I asked one of the paramedics where they would take him, and she told me the county morgue, where he would stay until they could locate next of kin or, failing that, arrange for a pauper's burial in the municipal cemetery. I thought about Pete's daughter, the one he had mentioned only once in all the time I knew him. She lived somewhere in California, had changed her phone number years ago after one too many desperate calls asking for money. He never blamed her for cutting him off. He said he understood that watching someone you love destroy themselves is its own kind of torture, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is walk away before the drowning man pulls you under with him. But standing there watching that van drive away with his body inside, I wondered if she would ever find out, if some bureaucrat would track her down and deliver the news over the phone like it was an overdue library notice. Your father is dead. He froze to death behind a laundromat. Would you like to claim the body? Here is what people do not understand about dying from exposure. It is not like the movies where someone dramatically collapses in a snowbank. Hypothermia is slow and insidious and almost gentle in its cruelty. Your body starts by pulling blood away from your extremities, sacrificing your fingers and toes to keep your core warm, and you feel this deep, aching cold that settles into your bones like something alive. Then the shivering starts, violent and uncontrollable, your muscles burning through whatever energy you have left trying to generate heat. But eventually the shivering stops, and that is when you know you are in real trouble. Your body has given up the fight, accepted defeat, started shutting down systems one by one like a building going dark floor by floor. The strangest part is that near the end, many people actually feel warm. Their confused brains misinterpret the signals, and they start stripping off their clothes, convinced they are overheating. They call it paradoxical undressing, and it is one of the ways they identify hypothermia victims. Pete still had all his clothes on when I found him, so at least he was spared that final indignity. But I think about those last hours, alone in that alley, and I wonder if he called out for Ruth if he thought she was coming to take him home. The newspapers ran a small story the next day, buried somewhere in the local section between a report on a school board meeting and an advertisement for a furniture sale. Homeless man found dead in downtown alley, the headline read, and they did not even print his name. Just described him as a white male in his 50s, no identification found on his person. Cause of death presumed to be exposure to extreme cold. That was it. That was the sum total of Pete Garrison's obituary, a man who had fixed pipes and paid taxes and loved his wife and lived a whole entire life before the world decided he was disposable. The article mentioned that 3 other homeless individuals had died that same week across the city, bringing the season's total to 11. 11 people, frozen to death in a country that throws away enough food to feed entire nations, in a city with empty office buildings and heated parking garages and churches on every corner preaching about loving your neighbor. I kept that newspaper clipping for months, folded up in my coat pocket, until the paper turned soft and started falling apart along the creases. I wanted to remember the exact number, 11, because someone had to. A year has passed now, and I'm still here, still fighting the same war Pete lost. I found a spot in a transitional housing program last spring, a tiny room with a lock on the door and a radiator that clanks and hisses like an angry cat, but keeps me warm. I think about Pete every single day, especially when the temperature drops and I see the news reports about warming centers opening and donation drives collecting coats. The thing is, coats are not enough. Shelters are not enough. Not when there are more people than beds and the ones who get turned away have to flip a coin with their lives. What Pete needed, what all of us need, is for people to stop looking through us like we are ghosts, to stop treating homelessness like a personal failing instead of a systemic catastrophe. Pete did not die because he was weak or lazy or made bad choices. He died because a society that can afford to send rockets into space could not figure out how to keep a grieving old man from freezing to death 6 blocks from a heated shopping mall. I carry that truth with me now, carved into my chest like a scar that will never fully heal, and I share it with anyone willing to listen. Pete Garrison was my friend. He had a name, a history, a soul, and he deserved so much better than an unmarked grave in a frozen field at the edge of town. My car became my apartment on a rainy Wednesday in September, and I wish I could say it was dramatic or cinematic, but it wasn't. 6 months after graduating from Ohio State with a degree in communications, my apartment lease ended, and I had exactly $400 to my name. My roommate had moved to Seattle with her boyfriend, my temp job at the insurance company had dried up, and my parents, well, let's just say going back to their house in Akron wasn't an option after everything that happened. So, there I was, 24 years old with a journalism degree collecting dust, and my entire life crammed into the back seat of my 2009 Toyota Corolla. I had picked the McDonald's parking lot on Cedar Road in Beechwood because it stayed open late, had decent Wi-Fi that reached the parking lot, and the fluorescent lights made me feel slightly less alone. I told myself it would only be for a few weeks, just until I found something stable. That was 3 weeks ago, and I had developed a whole routine. Park in the same corner spot after 11, use the bathroom before they locked it, sleep with my pepper spray tucked between the driver's seat and the center console. That particular night was a Thursday in early October, and the temperature had dropped to maybe 45 degrees. I remember because I had layered 2 hoodies under my winter coat, and still woke up shivering around 2 in the morning. The parking lot was almost empty by then. Just my car, an old pickup truck near the drive-thru that had been there since before I arrived, and a white van parked way on the other end by the dumpsters. I had gotten used to sleeping light, waking up every time headlights swept across my windshield or someone walked too close to my car. But when I opened my eyes that night, something was different. The air inside the car felt wrong somehow, heavy and charged like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I blinked a few times trying to adjust to the darkness, and that's when I saw it, a shape outside my driver's side window, not moving, not walking past, just standing there completely still, maybe 6 inches from the glass. My first instinct was to scream, but nothing came out. It was a man. I could tell that much from the silhouette. Tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing what looked like a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up. His face was pressed so close to the window that his breath was fogging up the glass in small rhythmic clouds. I could see the outline of his nose, his forehead, the way his hands were cupped around his eyes like he was trying to peer inside a store window, like he was window shopping. For a few seconds that felt like hours. I just lay there frozen in my reclined seat, praying that he couldn't see me through the condensation that had built up on the inside of the windows. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I just watched those little clouds of breath appear and disappear on the glass, over and over, while my mind raced through every possible scenario of what was about to happen. Then he moved to the back window. I heard his footsteps on the asphalt, slow, deliberate, unhurried, and watched his shadow drift past my peripheral vision until he stopped right behind me. The back seat was stuffed with everything I owned. Clothes in garbage bags, a small cooler, my laptop bag, a pillow and blanket that I used every night. He stood there for what must have been 2 full minutes, just looking at my things, and I realized with a sickening clarity that he knew. He knew someone was living in this car. He had probably been watching me for days, maybe weeks, learning my routine, figuring out when I was most vulnerable. The thought made my chest tighten so hard I thought I might pass out. I could hear him breathing now, or maybe I was imagining it. Every sound was amplified in that silence. The distant hum of the highway, a car door slamming somewhere far away, and underneath it all the soft shuffle of his shoes as he moved again. He came back to the driver's side. This time he didn't just look. I heard the click of the door handle being tested, a gentle pull at first, then harder. The whole car rocked slightly with the force of it. My locks were down. I always triple-checked before sleeping. but the sound of someone trying to get into your space, your only space in the entire world, is something that stays with you. He tried again, yanking now, and I could hear him grunt with the effort. Then his face appeared at the window once more, and this time he was closer, his features slightly visible in the orange glow of the parking lot lights. He looked normal. That was the worst part. Not some wild-eyed maniac, not obviously dangerous. Just a regular guy, maybe in his 40s, with a receding hairline and stubble on his chin. The kind of face you would pass in a grocery store without a second glance. He smiled at the window, and even though I knew he probably couldn't see me clearly, it felt like he was smiling directly at me. I don't know where the courage came from, but something in me snapped. Maybe it was the smile, or maybe it was the realization that if I didn't do something, I would just lie there paralyzed until he found a way in. I grabbed the pepper spray from beside my seat, sat up as fast as I could, and slammed my palm against the horn. The sound exploded through the empty parking lot like a bomb going off. The man stumbled backward, his face twisting from that calm smile into something like shock, and for a split second we just stared at each other through the glass. I kept my hand on the horn, the noise blaring, and with my other hand I held up the pepper spray so he could see it. I was screaming too, I think, though I don't remember what words came out. Probably nothing coherent. Just raw sound, all the fear and anger and helplessness of the past 3 weeks pouring out of me in one primal burst. He ran, not toward me, thank God, but away, cutting across the parking lot toward the white van by the dumpsters. I watched him go, still leaning on the horn, my whole body trembling so violently that my teeth were chattering. The van's headlights came on, and within seconds, it was peeling out of the lot, tires squealing against the pavement. I caught a glimpse of the license plate, partial, just the first 3 characters BKV, before it disappeared onto Cedar Road, heading east. Only then did I take my hand off the horn. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. My ears were ringing, my throat was raw, and I realized I was crying. Not soft tears, but the ugly kind. The kind where your whole face contorts and snot runs down your lip and you can't catch your breath. I sat there in the driver's seat, pepper spray still clutched in my fist, and I cried until I couldn't anymore. The McDonald's night manager came out about 5 minutes later. Her name was Brianna, a heavy-set black woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and a look on her face that was equal parts concern and annoyance. She had heard the horn from inside and wanted to know what the hell was going on. Tried to explain through my hiccups and shaky breath. The man, the window, the door handle. And I watched her expression shift from irritation to something softer, something like pity. She asked if I was living in my car, and I couldn't lie. Not in that moment. I just nodded. She didn't say anything judgmental, didn't tell me I couldn't park there anymore, didn't give me a lecture about making better choices. She just handed me a cup of hot coffee through my cracked window and told me she was calling the police. I wanted to hug her. I also wanted to disappear into the seat cushions and never be seen again. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, 2 officers in a Beechwood cruiser. A younger guy with a buzz cut and an older woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. They took my statement in the parking lot while Brianna watched from the doorway, arms crossed against the cold. I told them everything. The man, the hoodie, the way he had pressed his face to the glass, the partial plate number. The younger cop wrote it all down in a little notebook while the older one walked around my car with a flashlight, checking for any signs of tampering. She found smudges on the driver's side window where his face had been, and greasy fingerprints around the door handle. They took photos. The whole time, I could feel them looking at my car differently, seeing the garbage bags of clothes, the pillow in the back seat, the empty fast food wrappers I hadn't had a chance to throw away. I knew what they were thinking. I had seen that look before, from people at gas stations and rest stops, the look that says, "How did you end up like this?" without actually asking the question. The older officer, whose name tag read Sergeant Kimball, asked me how long I'd been sleeping in the parking lot. I told her 3 weeks. She asked if I had anywhere else to go, any family or friends who could take me in. I said no, which was mostly true. She didn't push. Instead, she gave me a card for a women's shelter about 15 minutes away and told me that what happened tonight could have ended very differently. She wasn't being cruel about it, just matter of fact, but her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I knew she was right. If my doors hadn't been locked, if I hadn't woken up when I did, if I hadn't had the pepper spray within reach, the possibilities unfolded in my mind like a horror movie I couldn't turn off. The younger cop said they would put out an alert for the white van, but his tone suggested he didn't expect much to come of it. Partial plates, dark parking lot, no witnesses besides me. I understood. I wasn't naive enough to think they would catch him. After the police left, Brianna let me come inside to use the bathroom and wash my face. The fluorescent lights in there were brutal, and when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My eyes were swollen and red, my skin pale and blotchy, my hair a tangled mess from sleeping on it wrong. I looked like someone who'd been living in a car for 3 weeks, which I guess made sense. I splashed cold water on my face and tried to pull myself together, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face at the window, that ordinary face with that terrible smile. Brianna was waiting for me when I came out, holding a bag with 2 cheeseburgers and a large fry. "On the house," she said. I started crying again, which was embarrassing, but she just patted my shoulder and told me to take care of myself. She said she had a daughter about my age, and the thought of her being out there alone in a parking lot made her sick to her stomach. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just thanked her and went back to my car. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I drove to a different parking lot, a Walmart about 10 miles away, and sat there with my doors locked and my pepper spray in my lap until the sun came up. Every van that passed made my heart race. Every person who walked too close to my car sent me into a spiral of panic. When morning finally came, I called the shelter that Sergeant Kimball had mentioned. They had a bed available, and I took it. I stayed there for 6 weeks, long enough to save up for a deposit on a tiny studio apartment in Cleveland Heights, long enough to get a job at a call center that paid barely above minimum wage, but at least paid something. I never went back to that McDonald's. I never saw the man in the white van again, though sometimes I wonder if he found someone else, someone whose doors weren't locked, someone who didn't wake up in time. That thought keeps me up at night more than any memory of his face at my window. I got lucky. I know that now. And I hate that luck is what it takes to survive when you have nothing and nowhere to go. Running away from home felt like freedom for about 3 days. After that, it just felt like being hungry and cold and scared all the time. I was 17, a junior who should have been worrying about SATs and prom dates, but instead I found myself sleeping on a bench in Riverside Park with a bunch of guys who had been living on the streets for years. My parents and I had been fighting constantly since my dad lost his job, and one night after a screaming match about my grades, I just packed a backpack and left. I thought I was making some kind of statement. I thought they would come looking for me, beg me to come back. Nobody came. I had $40 in my pocket when I left, and by the 4th day, I had nothing. Pride is a stupid thing when your stomach is eating itself. The group I fell in with was mostly harmless. There was an older guy everyone called Patches because of his jacket, and a woman named Rita, who talked to herself but always shared her food when she had some. A younger guy, maybe mid-20s, named Scotty, who had bad teeth and a nervous laugh. And then there was Carl. Carl was different from the others. He was quiet, kept to himself, and the other homeless people seemed to avoid him. He was maybe 50, with a gray beard and these watery blue eyes that never seemed to focus on anything. He had a shopping cart full of stuff he guarded like it was gold, and he slept on the far end of our little camp, away from everyone else. The others whispered that Carl had money hidden somewhere, that he was sitting on a small fortune but was too crazy to spend it. I never believed that. But I did notice that Carl always had food, snacks, granola bars, sometimes even sandwiches. And on the 5th night, when I had not eaten anything in almost 2 days, I could not stop staring at his cart. It was around 2 in the morning when I made my decision. Everyone was asleep, or at least pretending to be. The park was dead quiet except for the occasional car passing on the street beyond the trees. I'd been lying on my bench for hours, unable to sleep because my stomach kept cramping up. The hunger was not like anything I had experienced before. It was not just discomfort anymore. It was pain. Real pain, like something was clawing at my insides. I watched Carl sleeping near his cart, wrapped in a dirty sleeping bag, and I told myself it was just a candy bar. Just one candy bar. He had plenty. He would not even notice. I got up slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I crept over to his cart. My hands found a Snickers bar near the top of one of his plastic bags. I grabbed it and went back to my bench. The whole thing took maybe 15 seconds. I ate that candy bar in 3 bites, barely even tasting it, just shoving it into my mouth like an animal. The next morning started like any other. People waking up slowly, shuffling around, Rita mumbling her usual nonsense while she folded her blankets. I was still hungry, but the edge was off and I felt something close to relief. That relief lasted about 20 minutes. That was when Carl woke up and started going through his cart. I watched him from across the camp, pretending to be busy with my backpack, but I could see everything. He was counting his things, checking his bags, and then he stopped. His whole body went stiff. He checked again, more frantically this time, digging through the plastic bags and pulling things out. Then he stood up and looked around the camp with those watery eyes, and for a second I thought he was looking right at me. My chest got tight. But his gaze moved past me and landed on Scotty, who was sitting on a milk crate about 10 feet away from Carl's cart, closer than anyone else. Scotty had no idea what was happening. He was just sitting there, picking at his fingernails, not paying attention to anything. Carl walked over to Scotty with this slow, deliberate pace that made my stomach turn. He stopped right in front of him and just stood there for a moment, staring down. Scotty looked up with that nervous smile of his, the one that showed his bad teeth, and said something like, "Hey man, what's up?" Carl did not answer. He just asked, real quiet, where his stuff was. Scotty looked confused. He said he did not know what Carl was talking about. Carl asked again, louder this time, and I could hear the edge in his voice. He said someone took food from his cart, and Scotty was sleeping right next to it. Scotty started shaking his head, saying it was not him. He did not take anything. He would never do that. But Carl was not listening. The other people in the camp were starting to pay attention now. Patches stood up from his spot near the fountain, watching. Rita stopped her mumbling. Everyone was looking at Carl and Scotty, and I was just sitting there on my bench, frozen, with the taste of that Snickers bar still in my mouth. I should have said something. That is what I tell myself now, years later. I should have stood up and admitted what I did, but I was 17 and scared and stupid, and I just sat there watching it unfold like it was happening on a television screen. Carl grabbed Scotty by the front of his jacket and yanked him off the milk crate. Scotty was smaller than Carl, skinnier, weaker. He tried to pull away, but Carl had him good. He kept saying it was not him, please, it was not him. But Carl just kept asking where his stuff was, over and over, getting louder each time. Then Carl threw the first punch. It caught Scotty right in the face, and I heard this sound, this wet smacking sound that I can still hear when I close my eyes at night. Scotty went down hard, and Carl got on top of him. The other homeless people just watched. Nobody moved to help. Nobody said anything. I think they were all scared of Carl, or maybe they just did not want to get involved. Either way, they just stood there, and so did I. What happened next is something I have never been able to fully describe to anyone. Carl beat Scotty for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes. He punched him in the face, in the ribs, in the stomach. Scotty tried to cover himself, curling up into a ball on the ground, but Carl just kept going. At some point, Scotty stopped making sounds. He stopped trying to protect himself. His arms just fell to his sides and he lay there, and Carl kept hitting him. I remember the sounds more than anything else. The dull thud of fists on flesh. Carl breathing heavy, grunting with each swing. And this horrible gurgling noise coming from Scotty, like he was trying to breathe through liquid. I wanted to scream to run, to do something, but my body would not move. It was like my feet were nailed to the ground. I just stood there watching a man get beaten half to death because I stole a candy bar, because I was hungry and selfish and too much of a coward to speak up. Carl finally stopped when he ran out of energy. He was panting, his knuckles bloody, and he just stood over Scotty for a long moment staring down at what he had done. Then he spit on him and walked back to his cart like nothing happened. Scotty was not moving. His face was unrecognizable, swollen and bloody, and there was this dark puddle forming under his head on the concrete. Rita started crying, these quiet little sobs that sounded more like hiccups. Patches pulled out an old flip phone and said he was calling an ambulance. Carl just sat down by his cart and started eating a granola bar, calm as anything, like he had just finished doing some light exercise. Nobody looked at me. Nobody suspected the skinny teenager who had only been there a few days. Why would they? I was just some runaway kid. Scotty was the one who slept closest to Carl's cart. It made sense that it was him. Except, it was not him. It was me. And Scotty was lying on the ground, maybe dying because of me. The ambulance took almost 20 minutes to arrive. 20 minutes of me sitting on that bench, staring at Scotty's body, waiting for him to move or make a sound or do anything that would tell me he was still alive. He did not move. His chest was rising and falling, but barely, and the blood kept spreading under his head. When the paramedics finally showed up, they worked on him for a long time before loading him onto a stretcher. One of them asked what happened, and Patches just said there was a fight, some dispute over stolen property. The paramedic looked around at all of us, these dirty homeless people standing in a city park at 7 in the morning, and I could see the judgment in his eyes. He did not ask any more questions. The cops came a little while later, 2 officers who took statements from Patches and Rita, but did not seem too interested in investigating further. Carl had already disappeared by then, slipped away with his cart while everyone was focused on Scotty. One of the cops asked me if I saw anything, and I said I was asleep when it started. I lied right to his face. He wrote something in his little notebook and walked away, and that was it. Nobody was going to look too hard into a fight between homeless guys in a park. I left the camp about an hour after the cops drove off. I did not say goodbye to anyone. I just grabbed my backpack and started walking, no destination in mind, just needing to move, to get away from that spot where Scotty's blood was still drying on the concrete. I walked for hours through the city, past shops and restaurants and normal people living their normal lives, and I kept thinking about what I had done. Not just the stealing, but the silence, the cowardice. I had watched an innocent man get beaten almost to death, and I had said nothing. I had lied to the police. I was complicit in something terrible, and there was no way to undo it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Scotty's face, the way it looked before and the way it looked after, and I heard that gurgling sound he made when he stopped being able to breathe right. I found a payphone around noon. I do not even know why I stopped there. My feet just carried me to it, and before I knew what I was doing, I was dialing my home number. My mom answered on the second ring. She did not yell at me. That was the thing that broke me. I expected screaming, anger, all the things we had been throwing at each other for months. Instead, her voice cracked and she just said my name over and over, like she could not believe it was really me. She asked where I was, if I was okay, if I was hurt. I could hear my dad in the background asking who was on the phone, and then I heard him make this sound when she told him it was me. This choked, desperate sound that I had never heard him make before. I told them where I was, some intersection downtown that I barely recognized, and my mom said they were coming to get me. Just stay there. Do not move. They were coming. I hung up and sat down on the curb and I started crying. Not quiet crying either, but ugly, loud sobbing that made people on the street stare at me as they walked past. I cried for Scotty, who might have been dead by then for all I knew. I cried for myself, for how stupid and selfish I had been. I cried because my parents still loved me even after everything, and I did not deserve it. My dad's truck pulled up about 40 minutes later, and when he got out and saw me sitting there on that curb, dirty and skinny and broken, he did not say a word. He just walked over and hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. I never told them what really happened in that park. I never told anyone until now. I said I had been sleeping rough, that it was hard, that I wanted to come home. All of that was true, just not the whole truth. I went back to school, finished my junior year, graduated the next spring. I went to community college, got a job, built something like a normal life. But I never stopped thinking about Scotty. I looked for news about him for months afterward, searched online for any reports about a homeless man beaten in Riverside Park, but I never found anything. I do not know if he lived or died. I do not know if Carl was ever caught. That uncertainty is its own kind of punishment, I think. Some nights I still dream about it. I am back on that bench, watching Carl walk towards Scotty, and I open my mouth to say it was me. I took it. Leave him alone. But no sound comes out. I just sit there, silent, while it happens all over again. I am 24 now, and I have not stolen anything since that morning. Not a candy bar, not a pen, not anything. It does not make up for what I did. Nothing ever will. But it is the only promise I know how to keep. November can be cruel in Portland, Oregon, and that year it arrived with a vengeance that cut right through whatever layers you managed to pile on. My high school class had graduated back in 2009, and while most of them were building careers and families, I had been sleeping under bridges and in parking garages for the better part of 3 years. A bad divorce, a worse drinking problem, and a series of choices I still regret led me to lose my job as a warehouse supervisor, and eventually my apartment. By the time that particular Friday night rolled around, I had learned the rhythm of street survival pretty well. You find your spots, you learn which shelters have beds and which ones are just trouble, and most importantly, you find your people. That night, I was heading toward an abandoned lot off Burnside, where a group of us had been gathering for weeks. It was hidden behind a crumbling brick building that used to be a print shop, shielded from the main road by overgrown bushes and a chain-link fence with a convenient hole near the back corner. When I squeezed through that gap in the fence around 8 in the evening, there were already 5 others huddled around a rusted oil barrel that Jerome had dragged there a month before. Jerome was a Vietnam vet, probably in his late 60s, with a gray beard that reached his chest and eyes that had seen too much of everything. He had this way of keeping things calm in the group, a quiet authority that came from experience rather than intimidation. Next to him sat a woman everyone called Birdie, because she was always feeding the pigeons with whatever bread scraps she could find. There was also Tommy, a skinny kid who could not have been older than 22, running from something he never talked about, and the Pratt brothers, Lenny and Gus, who had been homeless together since their mother died and left them with nothing but debt. The fire inside that barrel was the only warm thing for blocks, and we guarded it like it was sacred. That night started out like any other. We passed around a bottle of cheap whiskey that Gus had managed to get from somewhere, and Jerome told one of his stories about his time in Da Nang. Birdie hummed to herself while she sorted through a plastic bag full of things she had collected throughout the day, little treasures that meant nothing to anyone else but everything to her. I had managed to score a pretty decent haul from the dumpster behind a grocery store on Hawthorne. A few bruised apples, half a loaf of bread that was only slightly stale, and 2 cans of beans that were dented but still sealed. I shared what I had because that was how things worked with us. You gave when you could and took when you needed. No questions asked and no debts kept. The fire crackled and popped inside the barrel, sending little sparks up into the black sky, and for a moment it almost felt peaceful. The temperature had dropped to somewhere around 30 degrees, and you could see your breath forming thick clouds every time you exhaled. We all stayed close to that barrel, shoulders nearly touching, drawing whatever warmth we could from the flames and from each other. The trouble walked through that hole in the fence around 10:30, wearing a torn army jacket and carrying a backpack that looked stuffed to bursting. His name was Ray Durkin, and everybody on the streets knew to stay clear of him. He was maybe 45, built like a man who had done time and used every minute of it in the prison yard. with a shaved head covered in poorly done tattoos and a scar that ran from his left eyebrow down to his jaw. Ray had a reputation for violence that was well earned. I had seen him break a man's arm over a sleeping spot near the Willamette River 2 winters ago, and the sound of that bone snapping still visited me in my sleep sometimes. He walked into our circle like he owned the place, dropped his backpack on the ground with a heavy thud, and immediately started warming his hands over our fire without so much as a nod to anyone. Jerome tensed up beside me, and I noticed Tommy slowly inching backward into the shadows. Even Lenny, who was usually quick with a joke or a comment, went completely silent. For a while, nobody said anything. We just sat there in that uncomfortable quiet, the fire crackling between us, Ray standing on the opposite side of the barrel with his eyes scanning each of us like he was sizing up prey. Jerome finally broke the silence by offering Ray a pull from the whiskey bottle, a peace gesture that I had seen him use before to diffuse tense situations. Ray snatched it without a word, took 3 long gulps, and then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He did not offer it back. Instead, he set it down on the ground next to his backpack and started rummaging through his things, pulling out a filthy sleeping bag and a tarp that looked like it had been dragged through mud. Birdie kept her head down, her fingers still moving nervously through her plastic bag, and I could hear her breathing getting faster. I wanted to say something, to tell Ray that there were other spots he could use, but I knew better than to put a target on myself. So I just sat there, my jaw tight, watching him settle in like a storm cloud that had decided to park itself right in the middle of our little haven. The argument started about an hour later, and it came out of nowhere like a punch you do not see coming. Gus had been getting more and more agitated as the night wore on, whispering things to Lenny that I could not quite catch. At some point, Ray must have heard something because his head snapped toward the brothers and his face went hard as concrete. He stood up slowly, and even though the fire was between them, I could feel the heat of his anger radiating stronger than any flame. He pointed a thick finger at Gus and asked him where his jacket was, the army jacket he was wearing. Gus stammered something about finding it, that he had pulled it from a donation bin outside a church on Glisson Street 3 weeks ago. But Ray was not having it. He crossed around the barrel in 4 quick steps and grabbed Gus by the collar of that jacket, lifting him halfway off the ground like he weighed nothing. That jacket was his, Ray said through clenched teeth, stolen from his camp 2 months back when he was doing a stint in county lockup for assault. Whether it was true or not, I could not say, but in that moment, it did not matter. The truth rarely matters when a violent man decides he has been wronged. Lenny jumped up to defend his brother, which was exactly the wrong thing to do. He shoved Ray hard in the chest, trying to break his grip on Gus, and for a second, it actually worked. Ray stumbled back a step, releasing Gus, who fell to the ground, gasping and clutching at his throat. But then Ray's face changed into something I can only describe as empty, like a switch had been flipped, and whatever humanity was behind those eyes just turned off. He came at Lenny with a fury that was terrifying to witness, throwing punches that connected with wet, heavy sounds against flesh and bone. Jerome tried to intervene, grabbing Ray's arm from behind, but Ray spun around and caught him in the temple with an elbow that sent the old man sprawling into the dirt. Birdie was screaming now, this high-pitched wail that seemed to echo off the brick walls surrounding us. I was on my feet, but my legs would not move, stuck somewhere between the instinct to help and the instinct to survive. Tommy had already disappeared through the hole in the fence. Smart kid. The whole scene unfolded in what felt like slow motion, but was probably only 15 or 20 seconds of pure chaos. That was when it happened. Ray had Lenny pinned against the ground, still swinging even though Lenny had stopped fighting back, and Gus came at him from behind with a piece of broken concrete he had grabbed from somewhere. He brought it down hard on Ray's shoulder, not his head, just his shoulder, but it was enough to make Ray howl in pain and roll off his brother. Ray scrambled to his feet, his face twisted with rage, and he lunged toward the oil barrel. I thought he was trying to grab something to use as a weapon, maybe one of the pieces of scrap wood we had been feeding the fire with, but instead, he just shoved the whole thing over in one violent motion, like he wanted to burn the whole world down if he could not win the fight. The barrel tipped with a horrible metallic screech, and the burning wood and embers inside spilled out across the dry weeds and trash that covered the ground of that lot. For a moment, we all just stood there, frozen, watching those little flames catch and spread like living things searching for something to devour. The fire moved faster than I ever thought possible. One second it was just a few patches of burning weeds, and the next it was a wall of orange and yellow racing across the lot toward the old print shop building. The dry autumn had turned everything into kindling, the dead grass, the piles of cardboard we used for bedding, the wooden pallets stacked against the fence. All of it went up like it had been soaked in gasoline. The heat hit me in a wave that made me stagger backward, and the smoke came right after, thick and black and choking. I heard Birdie coughing somewhere to my left, and I reached out blindly, grabbed her arm and started pulling her toward the hole in the fence. Jerome was already on his feet, blood running down the side of his face from where Ray had elbowed him, and he was yelling at the Pratt brothers to move, but Lenny was not moving. He was still on the ground where Ray had left him, curled up on his side, and Gus was trying to drag him away from the flames that were creeping closer with every passing second. Ray had vanished, slipped away into the smoke and the night like the coward he was, leaving the rest of us to deal with the nightmare he had created. I got Birdie to the fence and practically shoved her through the hole, screaming at her to run and not look back. Then I turned around and ran back into that hellscape because I could not leave the others behind. The smoke was so thick now that I could barely see 3 feet in front of me, and the heat was unbearable, pressing against my skin like a physical weight. I found Jerome first, stumbling in the wrong direction, disoriented from the blow to his head. I grabbed his arm and pointed him toward the fence, told him to follow the brick wall and he would find the gap. Then I went looking for Gus and Lenny. I found them near the center of the lot, surrounded by flames on 3 sides. Gus had managed to get Lenny sitting up, but Lenny's face was a mess of blood and swelling, and one of his eyes was completely shut. His left arm hung at an angle that made my stomach turn, clearly broken in at least one place. The fire had reached a pile of old tires near the edge of the lot, and the flames shooting up from that were like something out of a horror movie, black smoke billowing up in a column that blocked out the stars above us. I knew we had maybe 30 seconds before our only escape route was cut off. I grabbed Lenny's good arm and threw it over my shoulder while Gus took the other side, and together we half-carried, half-dragged him toward the fence. Lenny was screaming with every step, this raw animal sound that I still hear sometimes when the night gets too quiet. The fire was roaring now, an actual roar like some giant beast breathing down our necks, and I could feel the hair on my arms singeing from the heat. Sparks were raining down on us like burning snow, landing on our clothes, our skin, leaving little stinging kisses that we did not have time to acknowledge. We reached the fence just as the flames engulfed the spot where we had been standing moments before. I pushed Lenny through the hole first, as gently as I could manage, which was not very gentle at all, and Gus scrambled through after him. I was the last one out, and as I squeezed through that gap in the chain link, I felt the metal hot against my palms, heated by the inferno just feet away. We collapsed on the sidewalk on the other side, all of us gasping and coughing, our lungs full of smoke and our eyes streaming tears. Behind us, the entire lot was ablaze, flames reaching up toward the sky like fingers trying to grab the moon. Someone in one of the nearby buildings must have called the fire department because I could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. That sound triggered something primal in all of us. Jerome looked at me with those tired, bloodshot eyes, and just shook his head slowly before limping off into the darkness between buildings. Birdie was already gone, disappeared the moment she had cleared the fence. Gus looked at his brother, looked at me, and I saw the impossible choice playing out across his face. If we stayed, the paramedics would help Lenny, but the police would come too. Warrants, questions, the system that had failed every single one of us in different ways would swallow us whole again. But if we ran, Lenny might not make it through the night with those injuries. I made the decision for him. I told Gus to take his brother and go, that I would stay and flag down the ambulance, give them a fake name, tell them I found Lenny like this on the street. Gus hesitated for just a second, then nodded and started dragging Lenny away from the growing glow of the fire. I sat down on that cold sidewalk and waited for the red and blue lights to arrive, rehearsing my lie, trying to stop my whole body from shaking as the adrenaline drained away and left nothing but exhaustion and a sadness so heavy I could barely breathe. The paramedics found me sitting there about 5 minutes later, covered in soot and smelling like a chimney. I told them exactly what I had planned, that I was walking by and found an injured man on the sidewalk, that I had no idea what happened to him. They did not believe me. I could see it in their eyes, but they also did not care enough to press. They had a patient to stabilize and a fire to stay clear of, and some homeless guy's story was the least of their concerns. The firefighters arrived right after, 3 trucks that lit up the whole block with their flashing lights, and they got to work on the blaze that had now spread to the old print shop. I watched from across the street as they battled it for nearly 2 hours, eventually bringing it under control, but not before the building was gutted completely. A police officer took my statement, wrote down the fake name I gave him, and told me I was free to go. I walked away from that scene with nothing but the burned clothes on my back and lungs that would ache for weeks afterward. I found out later that Lenny survived. Gus got him to a clinic on the east side run by volunteers who did not ask questions, and they patched him up well enough. His arm healed crooked and he lost most of the vision in his left eye, but he lived. That was more than I expected when I saw him lying in that burning lot. I never saw Ray Durkin again after that night, though I heard rumors over the years. Some said he got picked up on a 3rd strike charge and was doing 25 to life somewhere in California. Others said he froze to death under an overpass in Seattle during a cold snap. I like to believe the second one, if I am being truthful, because it feels like some kind of justice, even though I know that is a dark thing to wish on another person. The rest of our little group scattered after the fire. Jerome moved south, said the cold was getting too hard on his bones. Bertie ended up in a women's shelter and last I heard actually got into a transitional housing program. Tommy I never saw again, just vanished like he was never there at all. As for me, that night changed something inside my chest, cracked something open that had been sealed shut for a long time. I checked myself into a detox program 3 weeks later, got clean, got a job washing dishes at a restaurant downtown, and slowly started climbing back towards something resembling a life. I still think about that night whenever November rolls around and the air gets that particular kind of cold. I think about how fast everything can fall apart, how a single act of violence can destroy the fragile peace that people build when they have nothing else. And I think about Jerome passing that whiskey bottle to Ray, trying to keep the peace, not knowing that some fires are already burning long before the first spark ever catches. Sleeping under a bridge in March will make you do things you swore you would never do. I had been homeless in Columbus, Ohio for about 4 months when that night happened, and by then I had already broken most of my own rules just to survive. Before the streets, I worked at a warehouse, had roommates, paid bills on time. Then everything fell apart in a matter of weeks. The warehouse shut down, I got pneumonia, my roommates left, and my landlord started eviction proceedings while I was still coughing up mucus in a free clinic waiting room. My mom died when I was 19, and I never knew my father, so there was no safety net waiting for me. The friends I had from high school were scattered across different states, living their own lives, and I was too ashamed to reach out and admit what had happened to me. Being a woman on the streets teaches you things fast. You learn to trust your gut, to avoid certain areas after dark, to never let anyone know where you sleep. I met him on a Thursday evening outside a coffee shop on High Street. It was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes your teeth ache. I was sitting on the sidewalk, my back against the brick wall, hoping someone might buy me a hot drink or drop some change. He came out of the shop holding 2 cups and offered me one without a word. Medium build, maybe early 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a gray wool coat that looked expensive. His name was Gary, he said, and he volunteered at a shelter downtown sometimes. We talked for maybe 10 minutes, just normal conversation. The weather, how hard the winter had been, how the city should do more for people like me. He had this calm, gentle way of speaking, like a therapist or a pastor. When he offered me $50 and a warm place to sleep for the night, no strings attached, I wanted to say no. Every instinct I had developed on the streets told me to refuse. But I was exhausted, freezing, and he seemed so sincere. I told myself I could handle whatever happened. I was wrong about that in ways I still have nightmares about. His car was a dark blue sedan, clean inside, smelling like pine air freshener. He drove carefully, obeying every speed limit, using his turn signals. We made small talk during the ride, and he asked me questions about myself, where I was from, how long I had been on the streets, if I had any family. I kept my answers vague, which he seemed to respect. He told me he lived alone, had been divorced for a few years, worked in insurance claims. Everything about him screamed ordinary. The drive took about 20 minutes, heading into a residential area I did not recognize. Lots of older houses set back from the road with big yards. His place was a 2-story house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, no neighbors within shouting distance. That detail registered in my mind, but I pushed it aside. He pulled into the garage and the door closed behind us automatically before we even got out of the car. I remember thinking that was a little strange, but I told myself rich people just had different habits. Inside, the house was neat, almost too neat. Everything looked like it belonged in a catalog. Matching furniture, no dust, no clutter, no personal photos on the walls. He gave me a quick tour of the first floor, living room, kitchen, a small bathroom. He pointed toward a hallway and mentioned that the basement was off limits because he used it for storage, and it was a mess. The way he said it, casual but firm, made me glance at the door. It had a heavy deadbolt on it, the kind you would see on an exterior door, not on a basement entrance. I noticed another door near the kitchen with the same type of lock. He caught me looking and smiled. Said he was paranoid about break-ins since his divorce. That explanation made sense on the surface, but something in my chest tightened. I had learned to pay attention to that feeling over the past months. It had kept me safe more than once. But I was inside now, warm for the first time in days, and I convinced myself I was overreacting. He offered me a shower and clean clothes, said his ex-wife had left some things behind that might fit me. The bathroom upstairs was spotless, white tiles, fluffy towels, expensive-looking soap. I locked the door and checked the lock twice before undressing. The hot water felt incredible, and I stayed under the spray longer than I should have, letting the warmth soak into my muscles. When I got out, I noticed there was no window in the bathroom. Just smooth drywall where a window should have been. The clothes he left outside the door were folded neatly. Sweatpants, a long-sleeve shirt, thick socks. They smelled like fabric softener. I put them on and came downstairs to find him in the kitchen, heating up soup on the stove. He had set the table with 2 bowls, 2 spoons, napkins, like we were old friends having dinner together. The soup was chicken noodle from a can, nothing fancy. He sat across from me and watched me eat with this expression I could not quite read. Not hungry, not impatient, just watching. I finished the bowl faster than I meant to, and he immediately offered me more. After dinner, he showed me the guest room where I would be sleeping. It was upstairs at the end of the hallway, with a single bed and a dresser and nothing else. No lamp, no nightstand, no decorations. The window had thick curtains drawn across it, and when I pulled them back slightly, I saw metal bars on the outside of the glass. Security bars, the kind people install in bad neighborhoods to prevent break-ins. But this was not a bad neighborhood, and every other house I had seen on the drive had normal windows. I asked him about it, and he shrugged, said the previous owners must have installed them. He had just never bothered to remove them. His voice was calm, but his eyes stayed fixed on my face a beat too long. I told him I was tired and wanted to sleep. He nodded, wished me good night, and closed the door behind him. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hallway, then tried the door handle. It turned, the door opened. I exhaled. Maybe I really was just being paranoid. I left the door open a crack and lay down on the bed, still wearing my shoes. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of the door clicking shut. The room was dark, completely dark, and I could not see anything. I reached for my phone out of habit before remembering I had not had a working phone in months. I stayed perfectly still, listening. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, then silence. I slid off the bed as quietly as I could and moved toward the door. When I grabbed the handle and turned it, nothing happened. The door was locked from the outside. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried again, twisting the handle harder, pulling, pushing. Nothing. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard breathing on the other side, steady and patient, like someone waiting. I backed away from the door and stumbled into the dresser, knocking something to the floor. The breathing stopped. Then footsteps again, moving away down the hall. I stood there in the darkness, shaking, trying to figure out what to do next. I felt my way along the wall until I found the window. The curtains were heavy and I yanked them aside, letting in a sliver of light from somewhere outside. A street lamp maybe, or the moon. The bars on the window were solid, bolted into the frame from the outside. I pushed against them anyway, knowing it was useless. My eyes adjusted slowly and I started searching the room for anything I could use. The dresser was empty, every drawer bare. The bed had no frame, just a mattress on the floor. No closet, no objects, nothing. It was like a cell designed to look like a bedroom. I went back to the door and examined it more closely. The lock was a simple latch mechanism, the kind that could be opened with a flathead screwdriver or a butter knife. I did not have either, but I did have a zipper on my jacket, a metal one with teeth. I took the jacket off and tried to work the zipper pull into the gap between the door and the frame, aiming for the latch. My fingers were clumsy with fear, but I kept trying, scraping and pushing, for what felt like an hour. The latch finally gave with a small click that sounded impossibly loud in the silence. I froze, waiting for footsteps, waiting for him to come running. Nothing. I eased the door open inch by inch, holding my breath. The hallway was dark, but I could see a faint glow coming from downstairs. Maybe a television or a lamp left on. I stepped out of the room and immediately noticed another door across the hall, one I had not seen during the brief tour. It was slightly open, and through the gap I could see a desk covered in monitors, 4 or 5 of them, showing different angles of the house. The guest room, the bathroom, the kitchen, the garage. He had cameras everywhere. On one of the screens I saw myself, a grainy figure standing frozen in the hallway, and I realized he could be watching me right now from anywhere in the house. I forced myself to move, heading toward the stairs, staying close to the wall to avoid any creaky floorboards. Every step felt like a gamble. I made it to the top of the staircase and looked down into the living room below. Empty. The front door was maybe 30 feet away. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard his voice behind me, calm and almost friendly. He said my name, the fake name I had given him earlier, and asked where I was going. I did not turn around. I ran. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly tripping at the bottom, and sprinted for the front door. My hand hit the deadbolt and I twisted it, yanked the door open, and felt the cold night air on my face for one beautiful second before his hand closed around my arm and pulled me backward. I screamed, loud and raw, knowing there were no neighbors close enough to hear but screaming anyway. He dragged me back into the living room and threw me onto the floor. He was stronger than he looked, much stronger, and his face had changed completely. That gentle, concerned expression was gone. His eyes were flat and empty, like he had switched something off inside himself. He stood over me and told me I should not have done that things could have been easy if I had just cooperated. He reached down to grab me again, and I did the only thing I could think of. I bit his hand as hard as I could, sinking my teeth into the flesh between his thumb and index finger until I tasted blood. He screamed and jerked back, and in that second I rolled sideways and got to my feet. There was a lamp on an end table near the couch, and I grabbed it without thinking, swinging it at his head as he lunged toward me. The base connected with his temple and he staggered, not falling but stumbling enough to give me a few seconds. I ran back toward the front door, but he had locked it again somehow. The deadbolt turned. The kitchen. I remembered the back door near the kitchen. I sprinted through the living room. knocking over a chair behind me to slow him down, and made it to the kitchen. The back door had a chain lock, a deadbolt, and a regular lock. My fingers fumbled with all three while I heard him coming, cursing and breathing heavy, his footsteps getting closer. The chain came off, the deadbolt turned, the regular lock clicked. I threw the door open and ran into the backyard, cold, wet grass under my feet, heading for the fence at the edge of the property. The fence was wooden, maybe 6 feet tall, and I hit it at full speed, grabbing the top and pulling myself up. I felt a hand close around my ankle, and I kicked backward as hard as I could, felt my heel connect with something solid. His grip loosened, and I hauled myself over the top, splinters digging into my palms, and dropped down the other side into an empty lot full of dead weeds and broken glass. I did not stop. I ran through the lot, across someone's driveway, down a street I did not recognize, just running until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would collapse. I found a gas station about a mile away, the lights bright and welcoming, and I stumbled inside looking like a complete mess, barefoot because I had lost my shoes somewhere, bleeding from my hands, crying and shaking. The woman behind the counter called the police. I told them everything. They went to the house, but Gary was gone. He had cleared out within hours, taken the monitors, taken anything that could identify him. The police said they would investigate, but I could tell from their faces they did not expect to find him. I spent 2 nights in a shelter after that, then got a bus ticket to another city. I never went back to Columbus. Nobody tells you how quiet the world gets after midnight when you sleep outside. My name is irrelevant now, but people used to call me Eddie back when I had a job installing drywall and a studio apartment in Tucson. That life ended somewhere between my second back surgery and the opioid prescription that insurance stopped covering. By the spring of 2024, my 36th birthday had come and gone without celebration, and I had been sleeping behind the recycling center on Conover Road for almost 8 months. I knew every shortcut in the city, every safe corner to rest, every business that would let me use their bathroom without hassle. I also knew which streets to avoid after dark, and that knowledge is what led me into that alley on the night everything changed. It was a Wednesday, I remember, because the shelter on 5th Avenue served hot soup on Wednesdays, and I had filled my stomach for the first time in 2 days. The Ridley Heights neighborhood had gotten bad over the past year. Drug deals happened openly on the corners, and 3 people had been shot there in the past month alone. I usually walked the long way around, adding 20 minutes to reach my sleeping spot, but that night my legs ached from walking all day looking for aluminum cans to recycle. The alley behind the old textile factory seemed like a reasonable compromise, a straight shot that would keep me off the main streets while cutting through the edge of the dangerous zone. I had used it maybe twice before without incident. The entrance sat between a shuttered pawn shop and a building that used to be a check-cashing place, both covered in graffiti and protected by rusty security gates. A single streetlight flickered at the far end, casting orange shadows that jumped and twitched against the brick walls. I pulled my jacket tighter, adjusted the backpack that held everything I owned, and stepped into the darkness with nothing but the sound of my own footsteps for company. The alley stretched longer than I remembered, maybe 200 yards of cracked asphalt littered with broken bottles and fast food wrappers. Dumpsters lined the left side, overflowing with garbage that nobody had collected in weeks. The smell hit me about 30 feet in, that sour combination of rotting food and stagnant water pooling in potholes that never drained properly. I kept my head down and walked with purpose, the way you learn to move when you live on the streets. You never want to look lost or vulnerable. You never want to seem like an easy target. Halfway through, I passed a shopping cart wedged against a chain-link fence, its wheels stripped and rusted solid. Someone had abandoned it there months ago, and now it served as a landmark of sorts, a sign that I had reached the midpoint. That fence separated the alley from an empty lot where the city had torn down an old warehouse 2 years back. They never built anything new, just left it as a flat expanse of weeds and concrete rubble. I was about 20 feet past the shopping cart when I heard it. At first, I thought it was an animal, Maybe a cat in distress or a dog whimpering somewhere in the lot. The sound was muffled, distant, coming from the other side of the fence. I slowed my pace but kept walking, telling myself it was none of my business. In my world, curiosity gets you killed or beaten or robbed. You learn to keep your eyes forward and your mouth shut. But the sound came again, louder this time, and I recognized it for what it was. A human voice. Someone crying out. The sound cut short like a hand had covered their mouth. I stopped walking. My heart began to pound against my ribs and I felt the sweat break out on my forehead despite the cool night air. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to pretend I heard nothing, to get out of that alley and never look back. But my feet would not obey. I crept toward the fence, staying close to the dumpsters where the shadows were thickest. The chain link had holes in several places, torn open by vandals or maybe by people like me looking for a shortcut. Through one of these gaps I could see into the lot. The moon had emerged from behind the clouds, casting pale light across the weeds and broken concrete. At first I saw nothing, just empty space and the skeletal remains of the warehouse foundation. Then movement caught my eye near the far corner, maybe 50 yards from where I stood. 2 figures. No, 3. 1 on the ground. 2 standing over them. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. One of the standing figures drew back his arm and swung something downward. The thud that followed was sickening, a wet, heavy sound that I had never heard before but understood immediately. The figure on the ground jerked and then went still. The other standing figure laughed, a short bark of amusement that echoed across the empty lot and reached my ears with terrible clarity. My body reacted before my mind could process what I had witnessed. I pressed myself flat against the dumpster, making myself as small as possible. Through the gap in the fence, I watched the 2 men step back from the motionless form on the ground. One was tall and heavy-set, wearing a dark hoodie with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows. The other was shorter, wiry, with a shaved head that gleamed in the moonlight. The tall one held something in his hand, a pipe or a bat. I could not tell which from that distance. He wiped it on his jeans and said something to his companion that I could not hear. The shorter man nodded and pulled out his phone, the screen lighting up his face with a ghostly blue glow. They seemed casual, unhurried, like they had all the time in the world. Like what they had just done was nothing more than a minor errand. The person on the ground had not moved since that final blow, and I knew with horrible certainty that I was looking at a body. I wanted to scream. I wanted to charge through that fence and tackle those men and somehow save whoever lay bleeding in the weeds. But I am not a hero. I am a 53-year-old man with a bad back and malnutrition and no weapon except a dull pocket knife I use to open cans. Those 2 would have killed me without breaking a sweat, and then there would be 2 bodies in that lot instead of 1. So I did the only thing I could do. I made myself breathe slowly, silently, fighting the urge to gasp for air. I counted to 10 in my head, then 20, waiting for them to leave. The tall one lit a cigarette, the flame from his lighter briefly illuminating a face with a crooked nose and a thick beard. He took a long drag and blew smoke toward the sky, completely relaxed. The shorter one finished whatever he was doing on his phone and shoved it back in his pocket. They exchanged a few more words, glanced down at the body one final time, and then began walking toward the opposite end of the lot where a gap in the perimeter fence led out to Dexter Street. I waited until they disappeared into the shadows on the far side. Then I waited another full minute, counting the seconds in my head, terrified that they might come back, or that one of them had spotted me somehow. When I finally moved, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I stumbled backward, away from the fence, my eyes still fixed on the dark shape lying motionless in the lot. Part of me wanted to go to them, to check if they were still alive, to do something. But a larger part understood that every second I stayed was a second wasted. Those men could return at any moment, or someone else might come along, find me near a body, and assume the worst. I knew how this worked. I knew who the cops would believe and who they would arrest. A homeless man covered in dirt, crouching near a murder victim in the middle of the night. I would spend the rest of my life in prison for a crime I did not commit. The only way to help was to find someone with a phone, Someone who could call the police and send them to this exact spot before it was too late, if it was not too late already. I ran. Not the careful, measured walk I had learned to use on the streets, but a full desperate sprint toward the end of the alley. My backpack slammed against my spine with every step. My lungs burned from years of cigarettes and sleeping in cold air. I burst out onto Fremont Boulevard and looked wildly in both directions, searching for anyone. A car, a pedestrian, an open business. The street was empty. Shuttered storefronts lined both sides, their windows dark and protected by metal grates. I kept running, my boots pounding against the sidewalk until I spotted the glow of fluorescent lights half a block ahead. A 24-hour laundromat, the kind of place that stays open all night for shift workers and insomniacs. I crashed through the door so hard that the little bell above it nearly ripped from its mount. Inside, a woman in her 60s sat folding towels at one of the plastic tables. She looked up at me with wide eyes, her hands frozen mid-fold, and I realized how I must have appeared. Wild-eyed, sweating, gasping for breath, a homeless man bursting in like a lunatic in the middle of the night. I tried to speak, but the words came out in fragments. Someone hurt. In the lot. Behind the factory. "Call the police, please." The woman stared at me for what felt like an eternity, her expression caught somewhere between fear and confusion. I thought she might scream or run or tell me to get out, but something in my face must have convinced her, because she slowly reached into her purse and pulled out a cell phone. Her name was Maxine, I learned later, and she had worked the night shift at a packaging plant for 30 years before retiring. She dialed 911 with steady fingers while I leaned against a washing machine and tried not to collapse. I heard her describe the location, repeat it when the dispatcher asked for clarification, then hand the phone to me. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, asking questions I struggled to answer. How many attackers? What did they look like? Was the victim still breathing? I told them everything I could remember. The tall one with the beard, the short one with the shaved head, the weapon that might have been a pipe or a bat. I told them the men had walked toward Dexter Street. I told them to hurry, please hurry, because someone was dying in that empty lot while we stood here talking. The police arrived at the laundromat 14 minutes after the call. I know because I watched the clock on the wall the entire time, each minute stretching into something unbearable. 2 officers took my statement while Maxine made instant coffee in styrofoam cups and handed them out like we were at some grim midnight gathering. They asked me the same questions the dispatcher had asked, then asked them again in different ways, looking for inconsistencies. I understood. I was a witness without an address, without identification, without anything to prove I was telling the truth. One of the officers drove me back to the lot in his patrol car. More police had already arrived, their red and blue lights painting the surrounding buildings in pulsing color. Yellow tape stretched across the gap in the fence. I watched from the back seat as paramedics emerged from the lot carrying a stretcher. The body on it was covered with a white sheet. Nobody was rushing. Nobody was performing CPR or shouting orders. They moved with the slow, deliberate pace of people who had arrived too late. The officer beside me said something, maybe an attempt at comfort, but I did not hear the words. All I could think about was the sound of that final blow, the wet thud that would echo in my skull for years to come. They found the 2 men 3 days later. Someone had talked, a girlfriend or a neighbor, or maybe just someone who wanted the reward money that the victim's family had posted. The tall one's name was Carl Denning, 41 years old, 3 prior convictions for assault. The shorter one was his cousin, a 26-year-old named Ricky Slade, who had been in and out of county jail since he turned 18. The victim was a 23-year-old college student named James Okonkwo, who had been walking home from his job at a warehouse. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong neighborhood. The detectives told me that my description helped narrow down the suspects, that my willingness to come forward made a difference. But it did not feel like a difference. James Okonkwo was still dead. His mother still had to identify his body. His friends still had to bury him. I did what I could, and it was not enough, and I have carried that weight every single day since. Some nights I still wake up in whatever doorway or shelter bed I have found, gasping for air, hearing that laugh echo across an empty lot. I tell myself I made the right choice. I tell myself that going in there would have just gotten me killed too. But the truth is, I will never know if I could have saved him. I will never know if 30 seconds of courage might have changed everything. And that uncertainty, that permanent maybe, is the thing that haunts me more than anything those two men could have done to my body. At that point in my life, I was staying at a women's shelter on the edge of town, trying to keep my days structured so I didn't spiral. Mornings were about lining up early, keeping my clothes clean, and checking the bulletin board for anything that paid cash. That day started the same way, with weak coffee and the smell of disinfectant clinging to everything I owned. I headed out before sunrise toward a day labor pickup spot near an old gas station where contractors sometimes showed up. Most days you waited for hours and went home empty-handed, but hope had a way of making you stand there anyway. I kept telling myself I just needed one small break to get back on my feet. Rent deposits, bus passes, and cheap motels all felt impossibly far away. That morning felt ordinary enough to be forgettable. I didn't realize how carefully I would remember every detail later. While we were waiting, a man parked across the street and watched the line for a while without getting out. He looked clean, well-fed, and out of place compared to the rest of us. After a few minutes, he walked over and said he needed help cleaning a house he was preparing to sell. He spoke calmly, said it would only take a few hours, and promised cash at the end of the day. No paperwork, no questions, just simple cleaning. He looked directly at me when he spoke, like he had already decided. I hesitated, but the others were already shaking their heads or backing away. Something about how quickly he singled me out should have mattered more. Instead, I focused on the idea of money in my pocket by nightfall. I agreed before I gave myself time to talk out of it. The drive didn't take long, but the scenery changed faster than I expected. Houses thinned out, streetlights disappeared, and the road narrowed until it felt forgotten. He didn't talk much, just made small comments about the weather and traffic like we were co-workers. When we pulled up, the house sat alone near a line of trees with no neighboring homes close enough to see us. The place looked empty in a way that felt intentional, not abandoned. No cars, no trash bins, no curtains in the windows. He unlocked the door and gestured for me to go in first. The air inside smelled stale, like dust and old wood, not like a place being actively prepared for sale. I asked where the cleaning supplies were, trying to sound casual. That's when he closed the door behind us and didn't answer. At first, I assumed there was a misunderstanding and tried to keep things light. I said I could leave and come back later if this wasn't a good time. He stepped between me and the door without raising his voice, saying we needed to talk first. The way he blocked the exit felt deliberate, like he had rehearsed the movement. I noticed then how quiet the house was. No hum of appliances, no distant traffic, nothing. My phone had no signal, just a blank bar at the top of the screen. He told me there was no cleaning job and asked questions that had nothing to do with work. Each answer I gave seemed to encourage him to stand closer. I realized then that leaving calmly wasn't an option. Whatever this was, it was already moving in a direction I couldn't afford to follow. I tried to slow everything down by talking, asking questions that didn't matter, pretending this was still a normal conversation. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, like it belonged to someone braver. He started circling the room, explaining how the house used to belong to family, how nobody came out this far anymore. He kept mentioning how people disappeared into routines, and how easy it was for someone to be forgotten. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. I edged toward a hallway, pretending to look for a bathroom, just needing space to think. He noticed immediately and told me not to wander. That was when the fear stopped being abstract and became physical, pressing behind my ribs. I understood that every minute I stayed passive made things worse. The hallway led to empty rooms with bare floors and nothing on the walls, like the house had been stripped on purpose. I noticed the windows were nailed shut from the outside, the wood splintered and uneven. The back door had a metal latch I couldn't open from my side. When I returned to the main room, He was watching me with the patience of someone waiting for a clock to run out. He told me I could sit down, that no one was in a hurry. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning, which felt cruel. I asked to use the bathroom again, this time sounding desperate, and he nodded too quickly. As I walked away, I realized he trusted the house more than he needed to watch me. That was the first opening I saw. In the bathroom, the mirror was cracked down the middle, splitting my face into two uneven versions of myself. I locked the door and scanned the room for anything useful. The window was small but not sealed like the others, just painted shut. I grabbed the towel rack and yanked until the screws tore out of the wall. The noise echoed through the house, followed by his footsteps moving fast. I smashed the window with the metal bar, ignoring the sting of glass on my arm. Cold air rushed in, sharp and real. He started shouting, telling me to stop, telling me I was making a mistake. I didn't stop. I climbed halfway out before he reached the door. The drop outside was awkward but survivable, and I hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath out of me. I didn't look back. My legs moved on instinct, tearing through brush and uneven ground toward the road I remembered. Branches scratched my face and my shoes filled with dirt, but I kept going. When I reached the pavement, a car slowed, the driver staring at me like I was something pulled out of a nightmare. I waved my arms and collapsed onto the shoulder, words tumbling out too fast to make sense. The driver called for help and stayed with me until others arrived. Later, authorities went to the house and found it empty again, like it had already decided to erase itself. I still think about how close I came to being just another person no one noticed missing. The shelter took me back that night without asking many questions, just handed me a blanket and a cup of soup that shook in my hands. I didn't sleep at all. Every time someone walked past my bunk, my body tensed, expecting to see him standing there like he had been waiting. The next morning, a caseworker sat with me in a small office and wrote everything down while I talked. Saying it out loud made it sound unreal, like I was describing a movie I barely remembered watching. She told me I did the right thing, that predators often looked for people who wouldn't be missed right away. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. It wasn't meant to hurt, but it did. A few days later, an officer came by to ask more questions. They showed me photos of houses on the outskirts of town, trying to see if any looked familiar. None of them did. The place I remembered didn't seem to exist anymore, at least not on paper. He explained that sometimes people used empty properties temporarily, moving on before anyone caught on. There wasn't much they could do without an exact location. Hearing that made my chest feel hollow. It meant he was still out there, looking for someone else. The officer suggested I avoid day labor spots for a while and stick close to places with cameras and staff. That advice felt small compared to what had happened, but I took it seriously. I eventually found steady work through a church program, cleaning offices during the evening. It wasn't glamorous, but it came with people around and locked doors that opened from the inside. Every time a man spoke too softly or stood too close, my body reacted before my mind did. I learned how to trust that reaction without letting it control me. I started saving again, slow and careful. I also started talking to other women at the shelter, sharing what happened without details that could scare them away from hope. I told them to listen to the moments that felt wrong even if nothing obvious was happening. Those conversations mattered more than I expected. Posting this now isn't about closure so much as clarity. That day taught me how thin the line is between survival and disappearance, especially when you're already on the margins. I don't know what his plan was or how far it might have gone, and maybe that's for the best. What I do know is that leaving when I did changed everything. I'm in a small apartment now, nothing special, but the door locks and the windows open freely. Some nights I still dream about that house and wake up counting exits. Other nights I sleep through until morning, and that feels like a victory I earned the hard way. At the time, life had narrowed down to whatever fit inside my backpack and whatever kindness the night decided to offer. Sleeping came in fragments, usually on benches or behind closed storefronts. and most days blurred together in a quiet fight to stay clean enough not to draw attention. That evening had been colder than usual, the kind that creeps through thin fabric and settles into your bones. A gas station on the edge of town glowed like a small island of safety, fluorescent lights humming and buzzing insects trapped against the glass. I went in because I needed water and a place to rinse my face, nothing more ambitious than that. My reflection in the restroom mirror barely looked like someone with a past, just a man with tired eyes and cracked lips. The sink sputtered before giving me lukewarm water, and even that felt like a gift. For a few minutes, the world outside stopped pressing in. The restroom smelled like disinfectant layered over something older and sour, the kind of smell that never fully leaves. I leaned against the wall, letting the quiet wrap around me, counting my breaths until the ache in my feet eased. There was no clock inside, just the faint music from the store speakers bleeding through the walls. At some point, the music stopped, replaced by the sharp clatter of metal somewhere near the front. A heavy thud hit the door, followed by another, louder this time, rattling the handle. Someone yelled something muffled, words lost through steel and echo. I pulled the handle instinctively and felt the resistance immediately. The lock had shifted, solid and final, like a decision already made. Panic didn't arrive all at once. It trickled in, slow and humiliating. I knocked back, trying to keep my voice steady as I called out that someone was inside. The pounding answered me again, quicker, then stopped altogether. Silence settled in so deeply I could hear my own breathing bouncing off the tile. The light stayed on, but the building felt hollow, emptied of people and intent. No phone sat in my pocket, no bottle of water on the sink, nothing that tied me to anyone outside that room. Time stretched in strange ways, minutes swelling into something heavier. Hunger gave way to thirst, and thirst became the only thing I could think about. Every sound from the street felt distant, like it belonged to another version of the world. Hours passed with nothing but the hum of the lights and my own thoughts turning sharp. Sitting on the floor, I realized how invisible I had become, how easy it was for a place to lock up and forget someone like me existed. If something had happened in there, there wouldn't have been a name called out or a number dialed. The door didn't care who leaned against it or how long they stayed quiet. That understanding hit harder than the locked handle or the dry mouth ever could. When the morning finally came and the door opened, the clerk looked startled, then embarrassed, then relieved all at once. I stepped back into daylight, changed in a way that's hard to explain. Since then, I've never stopped thinking about how close disappearing really is, and how no one would have known if I had. The moment the door opened, light flooded in like it had weight, and I had to shield my eyes. The clerk kept apologizing, saying the lock must have caught by mistake, saying they never checked the restroom before closing. I nodded because that was easier than explaining anything. My legs felt weak standing up, pins and needles shooting through my feet as if they didn't belong to me anymore. I asked for water and drank it too fast, spilling some down my chin, not caring how it looked. People stared for a second and then went back to their own routines, coffee cups and lottery tickets, morning already swallowing the night. No one asked how long I'd been in there. No one asked if I was okay. I stepped outside and sat on the curb, letting the cold concrete ground me. Cars came and went, engines starting, doors slamming, the normal rhythm of a day beginning. From the outside, the place looked harmless, just another gas station people forget the moment they pull away. I kept thinking about the lock, how a small turn of metal had erased me from the building without anyone noticing. If I hadn't knocked, if the clerk hadn't opened up when they did, the story could have gone very differently. The thought stayed lodged in my chest, heavy and uncomfortable. I watched the sky lighten and wondered how many times this kind of thing happens without an ending. Later that day, I tried to go about things like normal, but everything felt sharper. Thirst came back quickly, my throat reminding me how fragile the body really is. Every closed door suddenly felt like a risk instead of shelter. I replayed the sounds in my head, the pounding, the sudden quiet, the way the air felt stale after hours with no movement. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was clarity. Being homeless doesn't just mean lacking a place to sleep. It means existing on the edge of other people's attention. The moment that attention slips, you're alone with whatever happens next. That night, I didn't go looking for enclosed spaces. I stayed where I could see the sky, where doors couldn't decide my fate. The experience didn't turn me into a different person overnight, but it stripped something away. I understood how easily I could vanish inside a locked room, a stairwell, a forgotten corner of a building. Since then, I pay attention to exits, to sounds, to the simple fact of being seen. The world didn't change after that day, but I did. And even now, when I pass a gas station late at night, I remember how close I came to becoming a story no one ever told. In the days that followed, the memory kept resurfacing at strange moments. Washing my hands at a public sink made my chest tighten. Hearing a lock click somewhere nearby pulled my attention instantly. I caught myself studying doors, hinges, the way handles sat in their frames, like they were clues to something dangerous. It wasn't paranoia so much as awareness sharpened by experience. People walked past me every day, close enough that I could smell their laundry soap or their coffee, yet none of them knew how close I'd come to being sealed away overnight. I realized how thin the line was between being part of the world and being forgotten inside it. I eventually told another guy on the street about what happened, someone who'd been out there longer than me. He listened quietly, nodding, not surprised at all. He said something that stuck with me, that buildings don't see people, only schedules. Closing time doesn't care who's still inside. That idea haunted me more than the locked door ever did. Systems run smoothly because they aren't built to notice individuals like us. If you fall outside the expected flow, you're just an error that goes unreported. Standing there, I understood that the scariest part wasn't the fear or the thirst, but how normal the situation was. I started making small changes after that. I avoided going anywhere without at least knowing how many exits there were. If I went into a restroom, I paid attention to sounds, footsteps, keys jangling. I asked clerks questions I never would have asked before, just to make sure someone had seen me. It felt awkward, sometimes embarrassing, but staying invisible suddenly felt far worse. I didn't want my existence to depend on whether someone remembered to check a door. Those hours trapped inside that room rewired how I moved through the world. Cautious but alert. Nothing dramatic came out of it in the end. No report, no apology letter, no consequence beyond my own memory. Life went on the same way it always does for people like me, one day bleeding into the next. But I carry that night with me as proof of how close disappearing really is. If I hadn't spoken up, if timing had been slightly different, there wouldn't have been a story to post here at all. I'm sharing this because it happened, because it could happen again, and because some people only exist as long as someone remembers they're there. During the winter I'm talking about, my life had shrunk down to a backpack, a prepaid phone, and whatever space I could claim without being noticed. I wasn't living on the street exactly, not in the way people imagine, but I wasn't stable either. I worked odd hours cleaning offices after they closed, paid in cash, and slept wherever I could stay dry and unseen. That storage facility became my compromise with reality. Renting a small unit felt like a loophole, something almost clever, a place with cameras, fences, and rules that kept most people away at night. I told myself it was temporary, just until I saved enough for a room somewhere. That night started like any other, quiet, routine, almost boring in a way that made me relax more than I should have. The unit I used was narrow and smelled like dust and old cardboard, with a concrete floor that held the cold no matter how many layers I wore. I arranged my things with military precision so nothing scraped or rattled if I shifted my weight. The metal door, when lowered just enough, left a slit of air that felt like breathing through clenched teeth. I always waited until the facility went dark before settling in, listening for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional clank of someone leaving late. That evening, the silence felt heavier, like the building itself was holding its breath. I remember thinking it might rain, the way the air pressed against my ears. Sometime after I laid down, the stillness broke in a way that didn't belong. Footsteps echoed down the row, slow and deliberate, not the hurried pace of someone grabbing boxes before closing. Each step had weight to it, the sound bouncing off the metal doors in uneven rhythm. Then came the unmistakable grind of a lock being turned and a unit door lifting nearby. I counted the seconds between movements without meaning to, my mind cataloging every sound like it was evidence. Whoever it was didn't rush, didn't fumble, didn't curse under their breath. That scared me more than anything else could have. Without warning, the overhead light snapped on, flooding the corridor with harsh white glare that seeped through the crack under my door. My heart hammered so hard I was sure it had a sound of its own. Shadows moved across the concrete as someone walked past, stopping occasionally, testing locks one by one. I could hear the faint click of metal and the soft scrape of fingers along door handles. My thoughts split in two directions at once. Stay perfectly still and hope I blended into the building, or take the risk of slipping out while the noise masked me. Every instinct argued with the other, and the space around me felt suddenly too small to breathe. I pressed myself against the back wall, pulling my jacket tighter, trying to control the noise of my breathing without thinking about it too much. The footsteps stopped right outside my unit, close enough that I could see the shadow of shoes through the gap. There was a pause that stretched longer than it should have, followed by the soft rattle of my lock being tested. It didn't open, but the sound of it being touched made my chest ache. Whoever was out there leaned close enough that I caught the faint smell of oil and something sharp, almost medicinal. I realized then how thin the metal door really was, how little separated me from being discovered. The person moved on, checking the next unit, then the next, following a pattern that felt methodical instead of random. I shifted my weight carefully, inch by inch, making sure nothing brushed the floor. Sweat gathered at the base of my neck despite the cold, and my legs tingled from staying too still. Through the crack, I could see flashes of movement as the figure passed under each light. The way they stopped, listened, and then continued told me this wasn't casual. This was someone making sure everything was exactly how they expected it to be. A low voice carried down the row, not loud enough to make out words, but close enough to know someone else might be on the phone or using a radio. That changed everything. One person was terrifying, but the idea of more than one made the air feel heavier. I thought about the exit at the far end, about how far it was, about how loud the gravel sounded under shoes. Staying hidden meant trusting that my presence hadn't already been noticed. Leaving meant stepping into the open under full light, gambling that speed would beat attention. When the footsteps moved farther away, I slowly lifted the door another inch, just enough to see the corridor clearly. The lights hummed overhead, and at the far end, a figure stood near the office, clipboard in hand, checking something against a list. Another person emerged from between units, nodding as they passed each other. That was the moment I decided. I waited until both of them turned away, then slipped out, keeping low, closing the door as softly as possible. Every step toward the exit felt like it echoed, but no one called out. I didn't stop moving until I was beyond the fence, lungs burning, hands numb, carrying everything I owned on my back. I didn't go far at first, just enough to put distance between me and that building. I sat behind a row of dumpsters across the road, knees pulled in, watching the facility from the shadows. The light stayed on longer than usual, and I saw one of them walk the perimeter fence with a flashlight, sweeping the beam along the ground and the gate. It hit the spot where I'd slipped through not long before, paused there, then moved on. That pause told me everything I needed to know. If I had stayed inside, if I'd hesitated even a little longer, I don't think I would have walked out on my own. I waited until the lights finally shut off again before moving. My hands were stiff, and my shoulders ached from tension more than from the cold. I took a longer route away from the area, sticking to side streets, listening for engines slowing down or footsteps changing pace behind me. Every sound felt amplified, like my body was still trapped in that narrow unit. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just kept walking, stopping only when my legs threatened to give out, replaying the sequence of sounds in my head over and over. The next day, I went back during regular hours, trying to look like a normal customer with a reason to be there. I packed my things fast, avoiding eye contact, half expecting someone to stop me or ask questions. No one did. The office clerk barely glanced up. That normalcy was unsettling in its own way. I dropped the key in the slot, walked out, and didn't look back. I didn't argue with myself about it or tell myself I was overreacting. I knew better after what I'd heard and seen. I never slept in another storage unit again. I found a different arrangement not long after, one that didn't rely on being invisible. Even now, when I hear metal doors rolling up or locks clicking into place, my body reacts before my mind does. I don't know who those people were or what would have happened if I'd stayed hidden until they reached my door. What I do know is that trusting that place to keep me safe almost cost me the only thing I had left, the ability to walk away,